Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mantell Symposium in Environmental Justice and Conservation Innovation. We're very glad that you're here in the room with us or that you are maybe joining us online. I am Sarah Anderson. I'm a faculty member here at the Bren School and also the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Our dean, Steve Gaines, sends his apologies as he is homesick, and we're all trying to stay home when we're sick and not pass it around. So he sends his apologies that he can't be here, but I am really glad to be here in his stead. And I will start with, first of all, the Bren School wants to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional stewards of this land and all land upon which our university here is located. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, and the culture of this area, which has become this place of learning for all of us and for people all over the world. We're very fortunate because we have a few of those folks joining us today, and so this is a very appropriate time to be keeping this in mind as we learn today about these lands and these waters, which some of the presentations will be discussing. We as the Bren School have really been working on our commitment to diversity, to equity, to inclusion, and to environmental justice. And this symposium, through some generous gifts in honor of Michael Mantell, who's here and who you will hear from, and who I will introduce a bit later, is a piece of that. And what it does is it supports the Michael Mantell Student Fellowships, which, if you don't know what they are this great summer program where we bring together underrepresented undergraduate students, maybe first-gen, low-income, underrepresented, with graduate students. And maybe those are PhD students who have a research project that they're working on, and they can go into the field and sample the bark of oak trees together. Or that might be some of our Masters of Environmental Science and Management students who partner together with an organization to help work on solving an environmental problem over the summer. And in addition to that, we have built a program around this in the summer, a program of mentorship learning, of professional development, of coming together as a cohort to support each other in becoming that next generation of diverse environmental leaders. So it's a very exciting program for us. I'll just tell you a little bit more about what happened this summer. We had 35 student fellows who interned with 17 different projects. We had partners including the Nature Conservancy, the South River Watershed Alliance, the Los Padres Forest Watch, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration at the federal level, and Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. Our graduate students got training in that mentorship and leadership. And the undergraduates participated in a whole series of professional development. We are very, very fortunate that it is not just this gift that I'll tell you a little bit more about again later in honor of Michael Mantell that supports this program, but we've been able to leverage it and bring into the program a lot of our other community supporters, including gifts from the Nature Conservancy, for example, the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation, NOAA itself, Southern California Edison has been a supporter. Rincon Consultants, who also employs a lot of our graduates, has been a big supporter of this program, and some private donors, UCSB alums. We're just really lucky that this is contributing to a sort of broader, what we call the Bren Environmental Leaders program. So we call all of these students collectively our Bell Fellows. So you're going to hear from a lot of these students in a moment as part of each of the panels. You'll typically hear from a graduate mentor and participant and an undergraduate mentor and participant, and then some invited guests who might be partners in the project, and those will be moderated by faculty members. So that's what you can expect. But first, we get to have our keynote address. And so I also get the pleasure of introducing Rue Mapp, who's sitting here in the front row. Rue, the way I looked at her bio, what I could see from it is that Rue realized that what we see matters. What we see in front of us, what we observe in the world really matters. And so everything that she's done contributes to that idea from what I can see. So not only is she awarded leader, speaker, public lands champion, she's really shifted the way that people think about the visual representation of Black folks in the outdoors. So I don't know if some of you have the book that we handed out. Does anybody have that book to hold up today? There's a bunch of copies in the room of her book, which is called Nature Swagger, which we gave to the fellows, as actually generously Michael Mantell gave to the fellows. In addition to that, a book is not enough. Obviously, in addition to everything else, she's also founder of Outdoor Afro, which is an organization that celebrates Black people in the outdoors around the US. And then she said I couldn't give a long bio, but I have all this stuff. So she's a clothing designer. She is the co-creator of a hiking collection with REI. She's partnered with Cliff Bar, thinking about outdoor experiences again. And she's just really sort of prolific in this space of realizing that what we see and what we see in the outdoors really matters to how we experience that. And so we are very fortunate to have her today as our keynote speaker to kick off this Mantell Symposium. And with that, I ask you to join me in welcoming Rue Mount.
Can I hug you? Okay, thank you. Wow, what a generous introduction, Sarah. And I am just filled with so much honor to be here because this room feels like a homecoming. There are people in this room from Michael, Will Shafroth, Gordon Seabury, I don't know if you all are, oh, there you are, who I always say, know the road traveled. And I also want to offer that you all are also in a room with people who will know your road traveled. Don't forget them. Hold them close. And, this symposium named for Michael Mantell also is an honor to present for. I've had the privilege of working closely on an ongoing basis with Michael as his vice chair for the Wilderness Society. And he doesn't know this, but I've nicknamed him like the godfather of conservation. And so many learnings and so much support over the years from those named and those not in the room that I stand in gratitude for to this day. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about Outdoor Afro. So here's little me at my family's ranch up in Northern California. As you can see, I love to be stylish in nature even then. And the important thing about this location was that it was this hobby farm of my dad and my mom. My dad came from Texas, my mom from Louisiana. They came to California in search of the warmth of other suns, as Isabel Wilkerson so poetically describes in her book. And they were frankly getting out of the way of Jim Crow and very limited economic opportunities. But what they brought to Oakland, California was their love for the outdoors and nature. And so that place became a site of not only where we could hunt and fish and grow a garden, and I could fall in love with the landscape and the ecosystems. It was also a place of gathering. And we had people from our church, we had people from the city core come to this place and experience the kind of peace and silence and community. And I had literally a front row seat, that's me right there, to the joy and wonder of multi-generational experiences in nature and how much people really needed those connections in order to be filled. So life went on. I became a Girl Scout, and I also loved writing in my diary. These are actual pages from my Hello Kitty diary. And on these 2 pages, I'm summarizing my Girl Scout trip. Now, my parents were not camping people. It was through the Girl Scouts that I learned how to camp. And I fell in love because I could feel that same affinity experience with girls like me who were able to try new things and really find ourselves in that community in nature. And writing in my diary was just a way to revisit those experiences over and over again. So life went on. I went on to become an outward bound student, started a family. These are my 3 beautiful children at another public school up the way, if y'all may identify the Campanile. And unfortunately, I found myself divorced with 3 small children and decided to go back to school and complete a neglected undergraduate degree. Those were the hardest years of my life, I will say that. But we all went to college, and it was a moment of discovery and a chance for me to really understand how I could be a part of something bigger and more transformational. But I was thinking about going to grad school, but it was 2009, the economy had tanked, and I had a mentor who asked me the most important question, and I hope someone in your life gets to ask you that question or you ask it of others. And that was, if time and money were not an issue, what would you do? And I literally opened my mouth and my life fell out. I said, I'd probably start a website to reconnect Black people to the outdoors. And we both were a bit shocked because it was like, you know, sometimes there's things about you that you take for granted. Like I love technology. I'd been an early adopter of internet, had been using the internet, been using the early social media on campus when Facebook was only on college campuses. And I was using those to try and connect with people in the outdoors. And I felt like there was a story about Black people in the outdoors that wasn't being told. The story of Black people in nature as strong, beautiful, and free, just like I grew up. And so I set about, after that conversation, I just found a Blogger template, and I whimsically called this blog Outdoor Afro. And this was the very first iteration of what that looked like, which is basically me as a caricature. And I started just writing about like the stories like I'm sharing with you right now. And in this early nascent social media time, the algorithm was nice and flat. I was able to have these conversations from my kitchen table and actually reach audience without paying for it. And there was this resonance that occurred where people were saying, hey, you're telling my story. And I recognized, and my background at Cal was art history, so I really was connected to this idea that we could tell a lot of stories just through the right imagery. And we could be understood across language, across differences, messages that were presented through a visual narrative. So Outdoor Afro was so much about helping to shift the visual representation of who we imagine got outside, and set about to do just that. And an audience emerged that no one had been talking to. There were Black women out here between the ages of around 35 and 44, and it was almost like a dog whistle. I was speaking their language. And what I recognized about this group was that these were our community amplifiers. They were the moms, the aunties, the people who were a part of churches, sororities, fraternal organizations, and they had influence. They were the ones who were making the decision about what we're gonna do this weekend, what we're gonna buy, or what kind of adventure a family might take part in. And so by bringing that woman along, sometimes she'd be representing 5 people in the network. And then, you know, Outdoor Afro got some attention that I didn't even expect, like an invitation to the White House, which totally surprised me. I got this, the White House invites you to email, and I'm thinking, this is the Obama administration. I'm thinking, weigh in on healthcare, make a $5 donation. No, it was the America's Great Outdoors Conference. And as I was reading it, I was like, oh, these are my people. And it was at that convening is when I understood that there was a whole network of conservation, outdoor industry, advocates that I could turn to and even imagine an entire career. And that was the moment where Outdoor Afro grew up from being a passion project, where I met you, Will, and became a profession. And these are just a small sample of the various organizations and some of the brands that I had a chance to learn from. But people were asking me online, they were like, well, how do I actually get outside with people? This is all great to have this conversation. We love your blogs, but I want to get outside with people. And at the time, even though it's so easy for us today to imagine digital communication becoming action, that was still a pretty novel idea. And so I decided to take a lot of what I was learning and get myself out here and lead people in outdoor experiences, rooted in the kind of hospitality and welcoming and asset-based conversation that I grew up with and I knew that people in my community would absolutely respond to. So I took the time to learn for about a year or so, and then finally, and this is Lake Merritt, which is in Oakland, oldest wildlife sanctuary in the country, and I decided to put the call out on social media and ask, who wants to be an outdoor Afro leader? Basically, I wanted to just download everything that I was learning into other people so that they could go into their communities, their cities, their hamlets, and get people out in the way that I did. So a brave 13 said yes, and I taught them everything that I learned. We even brought people from the various agencies who partnered with us, some of our outdoor industry partners, and we talked about not only risk management and trip planning and logistics, but we talked about interpretation. We brought folks from the national parks to help us understand the importance of storytelling in our public lands. We brought in conservationists, bird watchers, policy folks, and more, so that people could be armed with a whole suite of knowledge that they can take and expand in their own communities. And so those are early learning years with some incremental growth, some iterations and changes that we made. And finally, I was like, okay, this is working, let's double it. And then let's continue to grow. And in 2015, I decided to grow up that blog and become a 501c3 organization. And you can see, look at how we're all grown up now, okay? And what's so wonderful is that this group has probably leveled out at around 100 men and women from across the country. We have representation in over 30 states, 60 cities, and our participation network is over 60,000 people who get out and hike and bike and camp and do all the things in the outdoors with us. And these individuals, the people who've become part of Outdoor Afro, have gone on to do some amazing things. Some, just like myself, chose other professions to lean into. They discovered, like me, an outdoor industry, a conservation advocacy world. They're awarded, they're public speakers, they're doing all the things. And so I'm continuing to pour into this group, and they're growing up with me and having incredible impact right where they live. And what's been also fun is to have them get together and lead capstone events like this one, where they went to the Appalachian Trail and followed the steps of Harriet Tubman. And then another group of these leaders went to the farthest reaches in Tanzania to summit Mount Kilimanjaro. And then I had a chance to return to what I like to call the capital W wilderness. This is an expedition I went on with the Sierra Club, and behind us is the Brooks Range, which seems to just go on forever and ever when you're there in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's such a special place. I hope you all get to go there one day. And it's one of those places that you recognize why it's so important that we protect it. And as we landed in our camp, we had a visitor. And we did all the things that people do when they're dealing with, charismatic megafauna. We tried to ration with it and go away bear and clap our hands and do all the things. And, there was this biblical herd of porcupine caribou that had gone ahead of it, and it got its attention, and the bear just took a whiff of Arctic air and just disappeared in the landscape. And I was standing there hiding behind a raft, and my knees were shaking, and I had this revelation. I was like, we are in this bear's wild. And sometimes we think as humans we're so much at cause, right? but we were in that bear's wild, that if that bear decided to enjoy us for takeout that day, that wild would continue to lumber on without any regard for its human passengers. And that was a very hard set on my humanity that day, and I know it made me better. But I was like, okay, so I've gone to the Arctic Refuge. How does this translate back at home in Oakland? And this is the Scraper Bike Kings. These are folks who are learning about bicycle maintenance and careers and in the bicycling world. And this is their wild. And I recognize that there is a common conversation with folks who, just like in the Arctic Refuge, have food insecurity concerns, have housing insecurity concerns. How can we do better in this work to help people understand their connection to places far away and places they may not ever get to visit? And then I also really became a scholar of even more Black history and nature, and found that in especially historic Black institutions, that environmental learning was just a part of the regular curriculum. And this is a great photograph I found. It's called Every Boy a Bird Box, where they were learning about, obviously birds and their wildlife. And so I really was able to lean on the fact that this is not new. Outdoor Afro did not invent Black people in the outdoors. This was Outdoor Afro standing on the shoulders of a very, very proud and deep history of connections. And yeah, some of those connections and some of those stories are awful. We can turn to the plaintive lyrics of Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, Blood on the Leaves and Blood at the Root, and recognize that for some people, and some people within a generational memory in my family, know about bad things happening in the woods and don't feel safe going, far aflung into wilderness areas alone. And this is why it's been so important for us to not only tell a new narrative, but to provide ways for people to feel better in going into the outdoors. And being in a group experience is one way to achieve that. And then, 2016 happened. Ferguson was causing, cities around the country to erupt in all kinds of feelings, right? And no matter how you felt, it was very, very tense time. And I remember leaving my office, this one-room office in downtown Oakland, and I could hear the helicopters overhead and, people boarding up their windows in anticipation of riots. And I was like, what am I supposed to do right now? I'm overseeing a Black-focused organization that's about getting people outside. What do I do? And the answer came so clear. It was like, you do nature, Rue. That's your lane. And that weekend, I got together a few folks, and we had our very first healing hike. And we've been doing healing hikes ever since, because when we go into nature, I find that is one of the most incredible platforms for us to be in touch with our humanity. The trees do not know what color you are. The birds are going to sing no matter how much money is in your account. The flowers are going to bloom no matter who you voted for. And so I'm continuing to take that lesson forward. People have been doing healing hikes as part of the Outdoor Afro Leadership Team training, and that's been our form of protest. And then we also got really clear about this really disturbing, we'd known about it in our families, but I really put into focus what the statistic of Black children drowning at 5 to even 7 times the rate of their white counterparts ages 5 through 19. I was shocked. And I'd been hearing stories of people, going into the water after a child and them drowning, and maybe the person after them going after that person drowning too. And so in 2019, I decided that, hey, if children don't know how to swim, they're not going to put a pole in a lazy lake, they're not going to ease into a tippy kayak, and they're not going to give a damn about plastic in the ocean. So we decided to, as an organization, teach every child in our sphere of influence how to swim. And we've given hundreds of what we call swimmerships out to help people get into water experiences for the first time, and their caregivers as well, because we're finding that, because of the ways it was codified, that people couldn't always go to the pools of their choice or the beaches and public lands of their choice. There's generations of folks who don't know how to swim, but we're here to fix that. And this is what it looks like, y'all. And for us, it's not just about getting outside and traipsing through nature on a trail. It's about taking the time to learn. And so our volunteer leaders are absolutely environmental educators, and we bring the spotting scopes out and we educate people about the landscape, especially over time when we go to a place over several seasons. And that has been a very important component of this work as well. And also, this is about a multi-generational experience. And I call this out because so often our focus is on youth, which is fine. But what I found to be true is that kids sometimes are taken into experiences without their family or their source of support for ongoing opportunities. And so a lot of times, to the case of swimming, adults don't know how to get out in nature, much less support their children in those experiences. And I know how much my family benefited by being in nature with their mama or with their cousins. And so this is what outdoor experiences look like in our network often. And sometimes we deliberately will have a learn to hike with your kid event so that people can figure out, like, how much do I actually need, or how far can I actually go with this 3-year-old? And so having these opportunities to, be imperfect and learn as a community, I feel is the gift we can give more people to hardwire and add to the toolkit of things that people can do in their own families over and over without us. And what's also been pretty exciting over the last few years is we've had opportunities to bring Outdoor Afro volunteers together to help them connect with their local representatives. It blows people's minds that you can actually go to the Hill in Washington, D.C. and talk to your elected representative, or maybe talk to their staffer, which is actually sometimes more cool, because, our elected officials need to know that everybody cares about laws and policies that affect the environment. And what's come out of these experiences, Hill Days we call them, are moments where we actually have some of those elected officials coming out and getting into nature with us right in their hometowns that they serve. And then I hiked with Oprah. I'll talk to y'all about that later, okay? That was a whole thing. That was another one of those, like, who is this? It was a lot, y'all. It was a lot. And then I became a born-again hunter. My parents have passed away for almost 20 years now, and there was a part of the story about Outdoor Afro, or at least a way that I could express it, that I felt wanted to be born and really honor my father. So I became a re-entry hunter in 2020. I sure had the time. And there's a lot of things to learn. But there's a lot of really strong conservation ethic that runs through hunting experiences, and the responsibility and accountability for what gets on your table that has really transformed me. But it's also connected me with a lot of people and places that I otherwise would have never had the opportunity to be with, people who I'm depending on for safety and to, of course, help me to be successful. And so it's allowed me to meet and expand the network of Outdoor Afro and community of support in ways unlike before. And it kind of feels like 2012 Outdoor Afro. Of course, me being me, I'm like, well, more people want to learn how to hunt. So I put together a group of beginner hunters and mentors, and we do what's called the Black Heritage Hunt. And we've gotten together for a few years, over the last few years, and we bring out a wild game chef and, really teach people from, safety all the way to, how to bring a beautiful meal to the table. And it's been a fantastic journey. So I just want to take a pause and let you know about just the 3 buckets of things that we've learned through this work, I've learned through this work. It's all about relevance, right? It's about meeting people genuinely where they are. I know we sometimes can have a vision about what we think is important or what we think organization or something that people need, but it takes a lot of listening and really being able to respond in a way that resonates with people's everyday lives. Leadership, I had no idea when I started this how important leadership development was going to be. And that's what you all in this audience represent, the investment in leadership that can actually make things happen at scale. And then finally, this is about a long view. I was just having a conversation with Michael and Will, and they've been, in this journey with me almost since the very beginning of Outdoor Afro. And I always say this, and it's been true time and again, that nothing happens faster than the speed of relationships. So give yourselves the grace of time. And sometimes that time looks like a generation for you to be able to look up in that moment. And I think about, because people ask me all the time, they're like, okay, so what does success look like, right? Like, when do you know you've won, Rue? And I was like, it's not going to be like the hike with Oprah. It's not going to be like the ticker tape parade down Main Street or a magazine spread or a particular award. It's just going to be like this quiet moment where we'll all look up and see people out in nature in proportion to their population and their opportunity, and it's no big deal. So I'm gonna just let y'all just sit with that, and then also share with you now just a few of the other things that were mentioned that are just continuing to build. I got some clothes, y'all. And that's actually, this is my fantastic, vibrant daughter right here. And so this is another barrier lowering activity from where I see it, because I've been wearing a lot of outdoor gear, and Gordon, your dresses, they're still in my closet, thank you. But a lot of the stuff that I've worn over the years, you can spend like $1,000 from head to toe and still look like a dumpster fire. So I was like, I want to be cute. I don't want to wear the uniform of the drab olive, and who told us we had to look that way in the outdoors? And sometimes you need to, sometimes you need to go to the trail and go talk to a principal at your child's school, or go to the happy hour, or go to the grocery, you've got a life filled with different types of activities. And so I really wanted to produce a line that could speak to those ways that we all live, right? You don't have to go home and change. And I also wanted to, play with 90s hip hop. And also, if you recall my 80s Gen X people, the parachute pants. This is a rendition of that. And then this t-shirt here that we just had for one season actually is a tribute to all of those famous Black refuges that existed all over the country before integration, that were people like Lincoln Hills and Lake Ivanhoe, and still to this day, like Oaks Bluffs in Martha's Vineyard, where people have always gone and had. These are innkeepers, outfitters, people who got equipment out to folks. And what I realize is they were the early contributors to the outdoor industry as we know it. So this work gets to sit on the shoulders of those pioneers. And then y'all have nature swagger. So listen, if you have a book, don't be coy. I want to sign your book. And I also want to thank the Mantell family for making sure that you all have an opportunity to read it. And I'd love to get your feedback about it. It's not an all-inclusive and all the stories of Black people, but I hope that it gets you along your way of telling your own story, your own family story in nature. So let's stay connected, y'all. Thank you so much.
for sure 5 minutes.
The 5-minute to,
But I'm not sure, but yeah, she's going to be your time tracker.
Oh,
It's
okay.
5 minutes. Okay, perfect. All good? Great. Do you want me to switch it on or you got it?
I got it.
Okay.
Yes. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I am so excited to be moderating this special panel. I have the honor of introducing our student panelists as well as our special guests. I'm going to start with our student panelists. So Austin Saunier is a second-year MESM graduate student. He's interested in advancing equitable clean energy transition. Austin worked and works at Direct Relief's Power for Health initiative, which I'll tell you more about. But for now, which it aims to provide solar microgrids for health centers serving impoverished communities in the U.S. Next to me is Marissa Sisk. She is a second-year Bren MESM student. She's a Muscogee Nation citizen and is also co-founder of Sunstone Energy, a clean energy microgrid developer that aims to support indigenous communities with their energy needs. All right, and our two special panelists here, Kimberly Dutcher is a government relations advisor for Direct Relief. She previously served as the Deputy Attorney General of the Navajo Nation Department of Justice, as well as serving on several American Indian Affairs councils. Her career has been focused on helping communities build resiliency. And I want to pause here and invite Kimberly to introduce herself in Navajo.
For my Navajo relatives who are listening and watching, Kimberly Dutcher Yinishne, Tafmaslani Nishle, Doba Lagana Bashischin, Naka Dina Idashache, Do Bilagana Idashanala, for defiance de Nasha Thahat.
Thank you, Kimberly. And finally, Laura Crane, who's to the right of Kimberly, is the director of the California Climate Program at the Nature Conservancy. Laura collaborates with conservation groups and government to protect nature and help create resilient, sustainable, and equitable communities. All right, I will kick it off by actually allowing our two student panelists to tell us about their internships this summer, and then conclude with that short description with a question for our two panelists.
Okay,
Marissa, please.
thank you. Hi, everyone. Last summer, I had the honor to work with GC Green. They're one of the two only indigenous-run for-profit microgrid companies, energy development company in the United States. Through this organization, I was able to help with grant writing, communication with tribes, optimizing battery systems and energy storage systems, and it was a really powerful experience to be working directly with people who look like me, which is not very common in my field of energy. So I was so glad to work with those people, and now I'm a fellow for Grid Alternatives Tribal Solar Accelerator Fund, where I'm working on a few objectives with working with specific tribes in California on amplifying their renewable energy systems in place now. And to end it with my question for you two, either of you can start. I'm wondering what approaches can be used to engage with underrepresented communities regarding energy access?
Thank you for the question, Marissa, and thank you for having us all here today for this event and giving us the opportunity to present our perspectives. I think, first of all, there's been such a mixed legacy, as you know, working with tribal people. And I think people that approach and work with tribal people, first they need to learn and respect the history. And there are 574 federally recognized tribes and other non-federally recognized tribes. And if you want to work with tribal people, you need to learn their histories, learn who they are, learn their stories, and really learn about them and their approach and what they value. That's what I think is primarily important. Listen to them, and communicate with them authentically. It's very simple. But I think that first part about first learning about who they are is really key.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the question. It's wonderful to be here. I've been working on clean energy since about 2007, really starting with a focus on how do we get clean energy deployed when there's all of these concerns about where it's being placed, because we all want clean energy, but it uses a lot of land. And so back in 2007, 2008, there was a big rush for solar facilities and wind facilities in the desert. Developers thought, oh, there's nothing out here. There's, best place possible for facilities. And we're surprised, I think, with the number of stakeholders that had an interest in the desert. Everyone from people who go out and recreate there to the military that trains there and conservationists, but of course tribes. So I've been doing a lot of listening over the last decade plus, and some of the things that I've heard about how to engage communities is that we need to provide funding. I mean, there's lots of people who are paid to work in energy, but to get the input of communities, and you need funding, you need training and resources. Another thing that's really important is not to always have meetings in government buildings. So go out into the communities and give people a chance to meet you, kind of as Rue was saying, where they are, and present information in a way that it's understandable. Don't go in and talk in technical ways, but again, meet people where they are in their understanding, because if you don't have community support, we're not going to be able to make this transition to a decarbonized society.
Austin, you're up.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Austin Saunier. This summer, I had the amazing opportunity to work for Direct Relief's Power for Health initiative. And before I go into that, I think it's really important that we all understand that electricity and energy access isn't the same everywhere. Around the world and in the US, everyone has different access to electricity. For instance, on tribal lands, I learned through some of my research last year, 10% of tribal members on reservations don't have access to electricity. And at Direct Relief, we do a lot of work with medical centers. And this day and age, most medicine is refrigerated, patient records are kept online, and vital life-saving machines like ventilators and dialysis all require electricity. So we really have to store equal access to electricity to really ensure an equitable energy transition. And so my work at Direct Relief was on the Tribal Power for Health initiative with Kimberly. And there's 1,008 tribal health centers in the United States. And our job was to narrow down that list and identify 3 to 5 demonstration sites. So we looked at electricity prices, power outage rates, FEMA social vulnerability, FEMA community resilience, tribal governance, and many other factors such as solar resource potential and others to really narrow down that list. And my question to you all is, what have been can you speak to any adverse effects of energy development on tribal lands or other underrepresented communities? And what can businesses, nonprofits, and developers do to ensure more equitable partnerships moving forward?
I'll speak first. Thank you. I'm just going to limit my comments to the Navajo experience, and I'll speak as a Navajo citizen and what I saw and what I now know, having lived there and grown up there most of my life. First is there was a lot of energy development on our land, and the Navajo Reservation, for those of you who don't know, spans 27,000 square miles across 3 states, in Arizona, northern Arizona, New Mexico, and in Utah. So it's about the size of West Virginia. It was a very large space of land. And energy development came probably mostly in the 30s and 40s. And there was a lot of coal development and a lot of uranium. And I thought about this recently when I watched that recent film on gosh, now I can't even remember the name of it, about the bomb. And they talked about getting the uranium. And well, they got the uranium, a lot of it from Navajo land, and they mined it there. And back then, there wasn't a lot of responsible mining. And when I worked at Navajo, I learned that there were 524 sites that needed to be remediated. And that's now, years and years after this mining took place. So there's the adverse effects from that. A lot of our people have suffered health effects from that mining and the unremediated sites. There's also a long legacy of coal mining, and this really has a mixed legacy. On the one hand, it provided our people with employment and ways to support their families during a very critical time in our history. But it also came at a cost to our environment, our land, our water, and our air. So we have very detrimental health effects, high rates of asthma and other things. So mixed legacy there, and but you know, we now know better, right? We know more now about how to be more responsible stewards of the land, and how when we engage and have partnerships with others, we can be more mindful about the long-term effects on our land, our air, and our water, and ourselves as people, and to improve our relationship with the land. And sadly, back then in the early, I want to say the early years of the modern Navajo Nation government, we didn't know these things, but we know better now. So I'm hopeful that going forward we can have partnerships and with a better eye toward not only being better stewards of the land, but also taking care of ourselves and having more equitable and balanced partnerships.
I'm going to speak to an example that's happening right now. There is a place in the Mojave Desert on the Nevada side of the border called Ash Meadows. It is one of the most incredible places. It's in this very stark landscape, and it's a place where groundwater gets pushed up to the surface, and there's these deep pools, like blue crystal pools, where there are fish, little pupfish that exist there and nowhere else on Earth. It's one of the most biodiverse locations in North America. I think it's the second most biodiverse location in North America. And there is a proposal for a lithium mine right on the border of this. In fact, the proposal is to do some exploration and drill some boreholes to see if there can be economic lithium mining in this location. And what we know, there's actually another place not that far away where a borehole was drilled, and it broke through the confining layer of soil, and it made an artesian flow of water, completely changed the hydrology of the area. And people who drilled the borehole tried to stop it. They poured in concrete. They did everything they could. They couldn't stop the flow of water. So the Timbisha Shoshone, which live in the Death Valley area, are very concerned about this because the water that is in Ash Meadows, one, is important to them, even though it's not on the reservation in Ash Meadows. But it's also important to them because the groundwater is a source of life. So I think that they're voicing their concerns. I think that the way that conservation groups are working with them is to try and elevate their voice, to use the connections they have to bring the Shoshone Timbisha in front of decision makers, but also to support them in thinking, well, what kind of resolutions are you interested in? What would work from your perspective in terms of what should be done? And so very much getting to that partnership.
Great, thank you. Now it is my turn to ask you as many questions as I can fit into the next 20 minutes. I want to start with actually tapping into your knowledge about the diversity of perspectives. So you mentioned this 575 tribes, many unregistered. I love to hear more about what are some examples of the different perspectives that these tribes have when it comes to developing energy on their lands.
Well, I think most indigenous people, I don't want to speak for all of them, of course, but From those that I'm aware of the different traditions, we all consider ourselves to be the first stewards of the land. And our connections to our environments, our land, our water, it's really one. And in the Navajo perspective, way of life, we strive for harmony, and the word for that is called honjon. And in honjon, we are one, and we're experience harmony with everybody, every living, everybody, people we run into, our relatives, our extended community members, our environment. And when we're living in honjon, we're in harmony, and we're not harming anything around us. And I think that's really the foundation of what, as Navajo people, we strive to live in. And when we're not living in honjon and we're living out of balance, we suffer the consequences of that. And there's another Navajo phrase that I know, it's called Tadang Ushoingo. And what that means is it's really up to us. And they say, our elders say that, we were given this land, the Navajo ancestral lands. We were given that by our creators to live there. It was a gift to us, and it has everything we need to live there. It has clean water and animals and food, everything we needed to live a good life. And it's our responsibility, therefore, to take care of it and to cherish this gift because it's intended to last forever. So those are kind of the values and perspectives from a Navajo way of how we're supposed to treat the land and be in harmony and being in one with our land. And it's ongoing, it never ends. And this is just one perspective that I'm aware of, but I'm sure, as I said before, there's other tribes that have their own perspectives based on their stories, their creation stories, their location, and their relationship with the environment.
So the Nature Conservancy has been doing different analyses to look at how, is it possible to decarbonize and minimize trade-offs with working lands, natural lands. And so we've done an analysis that basically pulls in energy modeling and these land considerations. And as we were doing that, we realized that one of the things that wasn't represented at all were the perspective of tribes. And so as a first step, as we looked across the Western electrical grid, we did a companion study to really go out and listen and ask what perspectives of tribes in the Western United States were around energy. The companion report is called Voices of the West. And we tried, actually, we have an introduction, but we didn't want to summarize what we heard. We wanted to bring the words forward that we heard, and so the entire report is quotes from the people that we spoke to. And one of the quotes is, "If you know one tribe, you know one tribe," which has stayed with me. But we heard a lot of different things, from concerns about raptors with wind energy, birds of prey. We heard about sacred landscapes and how difficult that is when developers come and developers want and need certainty, and tribes are being asked to provide input, and how do you give input about an entire sacred landscape? We've heard about cultural resources. We've heard about the connections between landscapes, cultural resources, food, economics. They're all intertwined. So those are some of the things I wanted to bring up, but I encourage anyone who's interested to really read the quotes themselves in Voices from the West.
Thank you. And now I'd like to transition to talking about some of the historic challenges that tribes have faced, especially in the context of the clean energy transition that we're currently undergoing as a society, and whether some of those could continue to emerge as barriers to energy development or energy access on tribal lands. And also some of the work that you're currently doing with direct relief, could that potentially pose as microgrid as an ongoing solution to these problems?
I think some of the challenges, as I alluded to before, is just there's a history of, unbalanced relationships. And specifically at Navajo, the modern electricity grid was not built to serve the people that live on the Navajo reservation. It went through the land, but it wasn't built to serve the people on the land. And I think at that time, the federal policy was more toward assimilating Native people or terminating our status altogether. So there wasn't a long-term vision that the Navajo people needed electricity. The coal plant that I mentioned earlier, it was designed to provide electrical power for Los Angeles, for Las Vegas, for Phoenix. And even today, around 30% of our people do not have electricity. 40% do not have running water. This is today in the United States. So those are the challenges. There's a history of, distrust and suspicion. And moving forward, I would like to mention that former Navajo Nation President Jonathan Nez issued a proclamation after the 2019 closure of the Navajo Generating Station, and it was called the Hayakoth Proclamation. And what Hayakoth means in Navajo is sunrise. And the Sunrise Proclamation was the tribe's expressed intention to pursue clean energy in the future, a more balanced approach. And it also included an economic vision. Like I said, in the past, coal, we had a mixed legacy because it did provide employment and it supported Navajo families for many years. But this Hayakoth Proclamation was really to shift to look at clean and more balanced energy to support the Navajo people. We're also fortunate to have a utility company, the Navajo Tribal Utility Authority, and we do have some solar plants operating today, but there's a lot more to be done. And I'm so encouraged because there are organizations and institutions like this institution that supports and funds research like Marissa's and Austin's. So they are learning more about how to support tribal nations and others who need cleaner and greener access to energy, and also to Direct Relief, who is willing to say, hey, what's going on in Indian country? How can we support them? Let's look at America's First People, who also, have problems with accessing medical care, and also for ensuring that their clinics are powered when there are disasters, when there are blackouts, which happens a lot more common in tribal communities than in non-tribal communities. So these are the efforts that I'm encouraged by, and partnerships, equitable partnerships, where there isn't someone else only benefiting, but the benefit goes on both sides. So I'm really encouraged by that, and I think it's a different era. We're in the self-determination era for tribal nations, and tribal nations are, equal partners sitting at the table and working with others to generate solutions to not just benefit themselves, but to benefit everyone, more balanced.
I'm going to keep this really brief and just emphasize again something we just heard from you, Kimberly, and something we heard from Rue, which is that when there's mistrust, you can't go, you have to go at the speed of trust. You can't go faster than that.
Austin or Marissa, I wanted to invite you, either of you, if you wanted to weigh in on that question as well. I know Austin has some experience in this.
Yeah, so Marissa and I have been studying tribal energy access, and we've been looking at microgrid development on tribal lands through literature review, but also it's been really important for us to interview tribal members. So we've been interviewing tribal leaders, government officials, and tribal business leaders in the solar and energy industry. And this has been very, very important because there's a huge gap in the data. Through our literature analysis, we found that tribal communities are very underrepresented in the data. Even just recently, I was looking at the Energy Information Administration, and I was looking at their blackout and energy price data, and they have just completely missed tribal communities. It's mostly urban utilities, it's not rural tribal electricity cooperatives. And in addition, the FEMA Risk Index is a variable that's used for a lot of resiliency planning. And the FEMA Risk Index, one of the biggest parameters is total annual expected loss. And the annual expected loss is based on property values, which are derived from property taxes. And most tribal lands are held in trust, meaning they're not eligible to pay taxes. So even one of FEMA's key risk indicators is totally overlooking tribal communities.
Great, thanks for that. All right, in the last two questions, I want to turn to some solutions. So in your experience working with federal government, state government, or nonprofit, what have they done to really help kind of provide support or alleviate some of these severe historic challenges? And are there any kind of protections in place to help these proposed solutions actually, benefit those communities that you were alluding to? So are there some examples from government relationships or organizations?
Yes, I'm hopeful, despite the history and not so positive things that have happened in the past. I'm very hopeful. I think one of the biggest pieces of legislation recently that has given me some optimism is the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides incentives, as many of you know, for clean green energy initiatives. And something that this federal legislation did that was new and had not done before is it gave tax credits directly to tribes. And this is important because as sovereign governments, tribes are generally not taxed. But the way the IRA is drafted is the tribes, if they take advantage out of these incentives, they get a credit. And that is huge because it gives a bigger incentive for tribes to participate, tribes and tribal organizations, I should say, in their businesses. So I think that is something that's a new and novel solution that gives tribes more incentives to participate. I'm also encouraged because the Department of Energy has an office called the Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs. And they're doing a lot of work with tribes across the nation, providing grants and to fund tribes' different initiatives into clean energy. And next month, they're having a conference in Denver that I will be attending with some of my colleagues, and they'll be showcasing all of the tribal projects. So it's a way to learn and to see all the innovative things that tribes are doing. So there's a lot of positive things going on, and I think the key to all of this is just partnerships and working with tribes, not as equal partners, treating tribal governments as the sovereigns that they are, and working in ways that benefit both the tribes and others, and not in lopsided ways where only one party benefits. So I'm hopeful.
I'd like to talk about a state, something that happened in the state that I think is very positive. The California Energy Commission just earlier this year approved a resolution to support the California tribes' energy sovereignty. And it lays out a whole number of things that the California Energy Commission is going to do, including funding and training and partnering with tribes to access federal funds, and how the California Energy Commission is going to improve consultation and participation and collaboration with tribes. So it really lays out a very positive approach for improving how to bring in tribes as partners with California. And one of the reasons why I think this is so significant, at the Nature Conservancy, we talk a lot about how it's such a both great gift and a huge responsibility to work with in California, because California has a place on the global stage when it comes to climate. It's really a leader. And so when you think about the state of California also leading in this way, I think it has ramifications far beyond California, and that makes me very hopeful as well.
Janet, anybody, Austin or Marissa, want to add to that?
So Laura, I'm glad you brought up the California Energy Commission. So part of my research this summer was working on like a Native American workforce development plan for the state of California, with the California Conservation Corps, California Workforce Development Board, as well as the CEC. And it seems as though workforce development is a tremendous issue at the moment with these different energy projects in Indian country. What we need to make sure to do moving forward is that Native local workforce get properly educated and certified so that they can have replicatable skills for projects in the future. So it's a really interesting niche that I'm interested in, and I'm glad you brought up.
All right, we have time for our final rapid fire question round. Oh, I'm sorry, do you have? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, so all of our goals up here, we really want a stored and equitable clean energy transition. We don't want to leave communities behind. And Kimberly's highlighted that even in her own community, a high proportion of citizens don't have access to electricity. And Marissa and I found in our research through interviews, through Lit Review, through looking at data online, we found that expanding transmission to these really rural, remote communities is very cost ineffective. It's between $60,000 to $100,000 to extend the transmission lines. And so our research has really centered on microgrid development, where you have, like say, solar and battery panels, and energy generation, distribution, and storage is all at the community, so they can bypass the aging, inadequate, or sometimes unavailable transmission infrastructure to really bolster the community's energy access and also resilience.
I just want to mention really quickly, you can tell Austin's my buddy because we're thinking the same things right now. I did want to say something else we found in our research is during the shift in the clean energy transition, we noticed that a lot of funding goes towards this giant pre-existing infrastructure. So for my tribe, it went straight to my casino first out in Oklahoma. And that's something that I've seen all summer. And for that reason, Austin and I have been looking at, okay, who are the communities that are being left behind in this transition? Not only is it natives, but a step further, it's the senior citizen living facilities, rehab facilities, mental health facilities, libraries, schools. So I did want to mention that our research goes beyond what's at face value as far as where the grant money is going currently. Because those are the real community centers where community voices can be amplified more.
And just to add on to that, and this is why initiatives like Power for Health are so important, because we're targeting, the health facilities, not necessarily the tribal administration buildings and the casinos, and those are important too. But direct relief is primarily, we're working for, the health clinics that, see the tribal citizens every day, that work with the elders and, the babies and the youth.
Okay, we have 2 minutes, so you're going to have to reserve one sentence for an answer to my question. How can institutions like UCSB's Bren School continue to promote equity and clean energy? I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to start with Austin.
Well, judging from efforts last year that I've seen with Bren faculty and students, we have an environmental justice club that advocates for all kinds of amazing policies, such as, really taking really trying to hire more diverse faculty. So I think in a perfect world, I would say, hey, let's try and hire some Indigenous faculty. But in the meantime, let's sponsor more fellowships, like the Mantell program that's sponsoring fellowships for, students from more diverse backgrounds, underrepresented communities. So that would be my first step.
I would say just clone Marissa and Austin, make some more like them. and send them to Indian country. Let them go there and see firsthand what our people, how we live, and how you can help us and educate others.
Laura or Melissa?
That's something I want to say too, is Bren has been really supportive in our research endeavors outside of academia. So coming up, we're going to the same program review from Indian Energy Policy out in Denver, Colorado, with Bren's support pretty soon. And getting out there in the field, talking to these tribal elders and these industry leaders is the most important thing we can do for our research. So we're grateful to have Bren support that.
I think that continuing symposiums like this, bringing in different voices, and for students, like we've heard, to go out and listen, to go have conversations, and to know that it's about relationships and hearing and learning. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And that concludes our panel.
It's on.
Oh, it fell off. So, welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to the second panel. Please find yourself a seat. Yeah, I'll give you a second to find a seat. So this is the second panel, and we're going to talk about sustainable fashion and environmentally and socially sustainable fashion. That's the plan. And so my name is Roland Geyer. I'm professor here at the Bren School. And I've done a fair amount on environmental sustainability in the apparel space, but social sustainability is a much newer journey for me, so I'm very, very excited about this panel. And first I would like to introduce the panelists. We have a stellar lineup, and I need to take my glasses off so I can read my notes. So to my right is Celine Lightfoot, co-founder and CTO of Beni, is that how you pronounce it? It's a software startup that makes second-hand shopping easier and thus promotes a circular economy in apparel. She also happens to be a 2019 Bren School graduate, so welcome back. And then next is Gordon Seabury, and he is CEO of Toad & Co., and that is an apparel company committed to sustainability. And he's also on the Bren School Eco-Entrepreneurship Advisory Council, so thank you for that. And then okay, so here is Shunsuke Yamada. He's a fourth-year environmental studies major here at UCSB with a concentration in statistics and now a budding knowledge in sustainable fashion, which he's going to share with us. And to the far right, or next to him, I should say, is Jenna Wessling, a PhD student here at the Bren School, and her research focuses on the sustainability, social and environmental, of apparel. So that's our panel. I'm very excited about this lineup, and now I'd like to invite Jenna and Shunsuke to talk about their summer internship experience.
Thank you, Roland, for that awesome introduction of all of us and everybody for being here to hear our talk today. So our research this summer that me and Shunsuke worked on focused on labor wages for apparel workers in the fashion industry. And mainly our research is focused on if we increase those wages to fair labor wage standards, how that can have positive social impacts, but also environmental impacts. And we chose this topic because the fashion industry typically has been known for not giving fair labor wages to its workers, and this typically affects people of color, especially women of color in developing countries. So we thought this was very an important topic to cover. And typically when you think of fair labor wages, you just think of the social impacts, but we wanted to bring in those environmental impacts. Typically when you think of environmental impacts and improving them in the apparel industry, you think of circularity, or you think of different material types that are innovative. And those are very, very important things to cover, of course, but we thought that labor typically is left out of those conversations because it just generally doesn't have environmental impact intrinsically, right? If you are riding a bike versus driving a car, that riding a bike involves manual labor has no impact, or mowing a lawnmower manually versus using a gas or electric one. So we really thought we could leverage that low impact environmental impacts of labor and try to incorporate that into our research. And a lot of people wonder, well, what does that really look like? So we're hoping to further investigate potentially, if you're increasing the prices for garments or for garment workers, and that makes the price of the clothing higher, then maybe you're decreasing demand and maybe you're decreasing emissions that way. Or maybe you're just if they're willing to invest in those costs for the higher price, well, now the spending that they had on other household items is decreased. So what are the savings from those emissions that those products would have been? Or maybe if it comes from the shareholders absorbing the costs and someone else's salary is decreasing, what are the savings from that as well? So I'll turn it over to Shunsuke to talk about what we specifically did this summer.
Hello, I'm Shinsuke, and for like the actual research methods and what we actually did this summer, a lot of it was literature review, where we would look into databases, look into papers that had these data, and see what we can find on what the paid wage of these garment workers were, where they were working, what part of their job or like manufacturing line they were working. We also looked at what the minimum wage in that region was, how this compared to the paid wage, what the living wage was compared to the paid wage, which is essentially what people living in those areas would need to have a decent standard of living, where they have enough to eat, enough to wear, enough place to live, and the basic needs for just living a decent standard of life. And what immediately became apparent was the fact that a lot of data on wages in the apparel industry is not there, whether it be that wage data is simply not available, it's not accessible to the public, or they just simply didn't have the level of granularity that we were looking for, where it was simply labeled as manufacturing or processing, and no specifics as to whether it was sewing or dyeing or anything like that. So that was the first issue that came apparent. But out of the limited data that was available, we found that in most cases, living wage was roughly, paid wage was roughly half of what the paid living wage was, meaning that workers were insufficiently being paid. Sorry. So yeah, they weren't being paid enough, and that was the extent of the research that we were able to do during the summer. But what this already signifies is that by paying wages, sufficient wages to workers, this would result in these apparel costing more than what the presiding apparel in the market currently is, which, if I can ask this question. Yeah. Which led me to wonder, if you two would like to answer this, is how each of you think we could encourage these consumers to adopt these more sustainable apparel options that we find necessary, whether that be changing the nature of the apparel itself, or whether it be changing the practice of apparel industry itself.
So, I think probably the simple answer is consumer education. There's a lot of information out there that's convenient but not necessarily transparent, and I think that's one of the things from, we're fortunate in our company in that I was inspired by baby boomer brands like Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia to build a company with impact and that, gave back and thought about the planet both from a social and an environmental responsibility perspective. And so, I think we've been doing as best we can, and there is gray, and it's a constant continuous improvement process, but we've done the best we can every year in the 27 years we've been doing it. So thankfully, when we woke up to this next young generation who's really engaged and paying attention to where their products come from and how they're made, we didn't have to retrofit. We had built long-term partnerships and responsibility. And so I think, being transparent and looking at, the decisions of where you make your product, who your partners on the vendor side are, and then how you translate that information effectively to your consumer so they can really distinguish who's doing it right and who's not, is probably the first big step. And I think for us, we were fortunate, as Rue pointed out, we were in the outdoor industry, which is an industry that was responsible by nature and really cared about inclusion and environment from the beginning. And so with that, we have a consumer that cares, and we can charge what it costs to make a product the right way. And so, we are a premium brand. We're not trying to move to the cheapest factory, the cheapest location. We're trying to really be thoughtful about where every element of our product comes from and who's making it and how they're able to live. And so that's probably the most important piece of it.
Celine, would you like to?
Yeah, I can answer as well.
Yeah.
So the approach that we took at Benny is essentially to make resale more accessible for all consumers. Everybody deserves high quality, durable goods, but there's a cost to producing a high quality, durable good across the board. And in everyday decision making, we've seen it can be challenging for people to make the sustainable decision every time around. It's a lot easier when an item of clothing serves a particular function, like for outdoor gear or pieces that are timeless that you're going to be wearing all the time. But for occasion-based shopping, for a Halloween costume, for if you have kids that are growing out of their clothes very quickly, if you're going to a wedding or a black tie event and you need a particular outfit, or if you're trying to express yourself in everyday life through your style and your clothing, it's not always attainable for everybody to make the sustainable decision. So this is why we think it's important to make resale as accessible to all consumers as buying new, and hopefully that can help people change their behavior.
Thank you.
I also had one question for you guys as well, and that was, what do you think is the biggest challenge with implementing social and environmental justice in the apparel industry? So you guys touched on this a little bit, but.
So I think one of the big problems is that they're siloed. Environmental and social, historically, are not looked at holistically, and in our experience, we picked the factories and the supply partners based on that holistic approach, but even like the audits and the metrics and so forth for environmental and social are very different, and that's a problem in and of itself. And I think that's starting to change. I think that these people are realizing, the world is realizing that social and environmental need to go hand in hand, and you can't solve one without the other. And so I think that will over time, but historically you had an environmental audit and you had a social audit. And thankfully for us, we just picked partners that we've been working with for 20 plus years in most cases, and we know everything about them, and they're dear friends. I've spent time with every one of the owners of our factories, and you just, that's the way to really solve it, is to know where your product's being made. And I think I agree completely, in terms of impact on the environmental side, the less you have to make new, the better. And so two of our biggest metrics has been, one of our core sustainability metrics is input that is recycled. So anything that we're making, I think we're north of about 50% of the input of our fabrications and product are recycled. And then we've launched circular as well, which it was pretty hard. Patagonia was very much on the bleeding edge of resale, but we just about a year ago launched resale. We have a full operation in Maine, and the idea is to give both our customers, it's called Tote Again, so it gets another life, and hopefully as many lives as possible. And we decided to open our own facility versus use a third party, so that we made sure that nothing that couldn't be resold ended up in a landfill. So we have donation partners, and then we have recycle partners, so we can really assure that anything that comes to us, make sure that it finds another and extended life. So I think that's about it.
Yeah, I guess I can speak to it more specifically from the world of resale. There's obviously a lot of challenges in the industry as a whole, but we decided to focus on behavior change because that can be so complex, and oftentimes people don't just change their behavior for sustainability reasons. They need other types of value, like a more discounted product, for example. So I guess one of the challenges that we face within the resale space, and also being like a for-profit entity, is that we can only have an impact if the displacement rate is there, right? Like if we're actually offsetting somebody making a purchase new, offsetting that to a secondhand purchase versus like driving consumption. But that can be challenging for us when our business model is specifically tied to driving consumption. We only make money if we can sell you a secondhand version of the item that you're looking at. So there's a variety of ways that we are tackling that. The first is to focus holistically on finding an exact version of what somebody is shopping for versus offering them like passive alerts like you might see like through an Instagram ad. You didn't originally intend to buy that thing, and now all of a sudden you need those pair of like flare jeans that are really cool. So it happens to all of us. I know that it does. So that's one area, is focusing on, you know, as much as possible, showing them an exact replica of what they were shopping for new, but secondhand. But the other things that we're thinking about is how can we continue to capture and create value in the resale industry, both for our consumers and for the brands. So one example of that is, like, as a shopper, can we help you see your clothing as assets and ultimately make it more accessible and possible for you to resell an item for almost the same price that you bought it for if you take good care of it over time, so that it's a lot easier for you to make that sustainable decision and buy the higher quality good because you know that it will retain resale value versus just buying directly fast fashion. So that's one area that we're looking at for on the consumer side. And for the brand side, what we've been really looking at is how can we continue to help brands capture the value of resale and be incentivized to produce a higher quality good and less of them, and then, you know, be able to capture the value of selling that item again and again and again, so that the production of net new clothing goes down, and that can relieve some pressure off of garment workers in the industry, and hopefully, you know, alongside of like with policy initiatives and whatnot, can support in providing a more equitable working environments, and you know, really pulling in like the environmental and social cost of producing a garment.
Thank you. So what, Gordon, what you said about the sort of the siloing of environmental sustainability thinking and efforts and social sustainability thinking has really resonated with me. Also from the research side, when I started to, you know, when I put together that idea that actually paying living wages to garment workers all along the supply chain might actually not just create social sustainability benefits, but also environmental benefits through basically helping consumers spend money on what I call zero impact dollars, right? If you just pay for people's times and skills. And when I put that idea out, and I'm still, you know, Jenna and I are going to hopefully work through this in detail and academic rigor, but when I just felt like putting that idea out, I suddenly got emails from people I never heard of, because the whole, you know, social sustainability NGO world and activism world and researcher world I had never heard of, and they had never heard of me. So suddenly there was this connection. And that got me really excited. And obviously the living wage struggle's been going on for decades, and still we're not there. So just at the risk of just you know, you having to sort of think on your feet, because we're also now exploring the relationship between environmental and social sustainability in the apparel space. So my question to you is sort of how do you think about the relationship between environmental and social sustainability? So in your enterprise, in the apparel world, given that originally was such a siloed thing, and is that because it is, or what did we get wrong in the past there?
I think the simple answer is that you get what you pay for. And I think that's really, if you're making trade-offs because your price is the most important value proposition to your audience, then chances are some corners are getting cut, whether it's on the environmental or the social, or in many cases both. I mean, my children are in their 20s, they're your peers, and they are scarred for life by every time we walk by an Old Navy and I explained how a $5 pair of jeans or a $5 t-shirt is just not possible. And so I do think it's really buy less, buy better, and know the brands that you're supporting, and that's, you know, we are not cutting corners. And we had a brief conversation last week, and I was saying, and this is not to throw fair trade under the bus, because fair trade is a really good initiative, but we don't work in countries that use fair trade laws, because that typically means there's corners being cut, and the wage issue is an issue. It's not a holistic look at what the economy is that's providing. So it all comes down to, again, and not to sound repetitive, but consumer education, and then thoughtful and intentional decisions on the purchasing side, and extending life of product and maintaining the value of product is also super valuable. It's one of the best things that has evolved in the last decade, is the resale market and solutions like Benny.
Selena, I want to invite you to think on the spot about how do you think about the relationship of environmental social sustainability, so when it comes to your startup, or just thinking about apparel, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I know that, like, when we hopped on a call earlier, it was interesting to think about the fact that social sustainability isn't necessarily factored into life cycle assessments today. And even life cycle assessments today, like the environmental cost of producing an item is also not necessarily involved into like the bottom line of a company. And so it's challenging we need to do both. Ultimately, what does a world look like in which we can factor in the social cost of producing a garment into the analyses that these companies are taking in order to produce a good. But I don't have the answer to that. So.
Well, I think no one has. Otherwise, we would.
I'd like to add just one other thing. I know that the research was looking at supply chain and product sourcing. I think the other big piece, and this is as important, and Rue's speech speaks to it loud and clear, is social equity and responsibility in the market you're in. And so, we're a member of 1% for the Planet, and we support a bunch of great non-for-profits. We've really been committed to inclusion as one of our philosophies. We've had a social venture partnership with a non-for-profit in Chicago called Planet Access that supports people with disabilities and all sorts of great programs, arts, travel, and so forth. We were involved with Rue in her early days. And so I think brands are also, on one hand, make sure your product's made in great, sustainable, socially responsible places, but then also, what's the brand doing on the other side when they're collecting customer money and putting it back into underserved communities and underserved programs and non-for-profits?
I have like a very tangential thing to add. I went to like a conference the other day, and it was really interesting. It was called the Sustainable Fashion Forum. I highly recommend for those that are interested in sustainable apparel. Brittany organizes, and she's the best. Anyways, so what I learned at this conference, I think it was like Adidas that was on the panel, and they were getting like hounded over their supply chains, and they said that we're working with our supply chains to better them and creating systems in place for garment workers to speak out about harsh and working conditions within the garment industry. And I was talking to somebody afterwards who was frustrated because they work closely with these garment workers, and to think about it from the perspective of the garment worker. Imagine you are in your workplace, you single yourself out by speaking out about the harsh conditions. All of a sudden, your livelihood and your job is at stake, and you need to feed your family. So also like making those kinds of decisions as a garment worker to speak out about the harsh working conditions can be tough. It's a lot easier to, in some ways, just shut your mouth and work, right? So I think it's a tangent, but it's interesting to see just from all perspectives, like brands are doing the best that they can, but sometimes it's complex. You don't even know where your supply chain is coming from, who they're sourcing from, et cetera. And that's not factored into LCAs today. There's too much complexity and specificity in that, so it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you want to add anything or have any thoughts there, or should I move on to
Yeah, I would just echo what Celine said, in that supply chain transparency is very important, and to include those suppliers in your stakeholder conversations so that they don't have to feel singled out. Include them in the conversations and receive their feedback. I think that's really important.
The Higg Index was intended to do that, and that was the vision. It was started in the Outdoor Industry Association. We funded it for a bunch of years and then handed it off with private funding to expand. What's happening now, I think there's just, the problem is the powers that be don't want a consumer-facing tool, right? It's right now the Higg is used internally. We use it. Many brands have adopted it, but it's an internal impact tool that assesses the impact of each of your products and doesn't address social. So I don't think there's any social aspect to it. But we were big proponents from the beginning of have a label. You know, even if it's not a score, I'd love to have a score, my products scored, because that's going to change behavior throughout the industry. But you know, the scale, the mass is controlled by folks that are probably not too comfortable with their scores. And so that's what's interesting now. I think where we're going, at least as it relates to our products and footwear and equipment, is a combination of data, which Higg was data, came from actually a ton of great work that Nike did and other outdoor industry companies, and literally just measurement on the ground, like where is the energy going or coming from that's going to your factory, and what's coming out the smokestack, and the combination of those two pieces of information and inputs probably will get us to an accurate answer. So I think Europe's going to drive it, is what it's looking like, but Europeans are probably unrealistic as to what it's going to cost, and so someone's going to have to pay for it.
I just want to very briefly circle back to something that I think I heard you say, is that it sounded like you were quite skeptical of fair wages laws, and I just sort of spent 20 years, you know, in this sustainable space, sort of convincing myself that voluntary efforts largely did not really deliver what I hoped they would. So I'm now personally looking more and more towards policymakers and lawmakers to you know, cost in the environmental cost and the social cost. So do you think it's more, where does everyone here stand on the panel on that?
Well, what I said, I didn't want to throw fair trade under the bus, but fair trade countries typically have those laws and regulations, oftentimes are challenging to actually fully mandate, and generally speaking, they're needed for those countries because they're low-wage countries. So we choose not to work in countries that deal in, or we just have been fortunate enough to have supply chains that don't have fair trade standards. So therefore, that's not a concern, you know, and the factories we work with pay a fair wage. So again, not against regulation in those countries, just it can be a slippery slope, or can be treacherous in terms of knowing really where all of your inputs are coming from.
Sounds great. And there, I'd quick shout out while we're at it. California did pass the Garment Worker Protection Act, Senate Bill 62. That was a huge win, and so I just want to say this. You know, it's not all bad news. So everyone was super excited when that happened. We're running out of time. So I had a couple of great questions about circularity, but we'll have to do that over coffee now. So I have to go straight to my last question. What would you say is the most important step the apparel industry could take to increase both environmental sustainability and social sustainability? If you have to choose one thing and you were king for a day, what would you implement? And that's for all four of you.
Yeah, I think, again, influencing consumer behavior is really important, but I also think decolonizing sustainability, decolonizing circularity itself, going back to Black and Brown and Native communities and hearing their thoughts on ways that we can implement better strategies, and also, just trying to get back into pre-industrialized activities for apparel. And then again, in supply chains, reduce those subcontractors, make your supply chain smaller so you really know who you're talking to.
Right. Shunsuke.
I would also agree about the fact that consumer behavior is really important. I think that a lot of times in the current state, apparel is considered something that's replaceable. But I think that in the past, apparel was something that was taken care of. It was passed down from family, like parent to child, and so forth. So I think that value of what goes into making clothing, what meaning it holds, what value it holds, has somewhat decreased. So I think changing that idea about what it costs, what it means to make clothing and pass it down is the first step.
Thank you, Gordon.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think people don't realize how expensive and how difficult it is to get the product that you wear in the right size to fit and last. I think that's a big one. And I would just say transparency to Will's question. If companies were forced to show what went into their products on their labels and on their websites, and that was monitored and accredited, that would change the game completely, because you can't hide when that number's out there.
Yeah, I guess if I was queen for a day.
Indeed.
What I would do is essentially, if we could actually factor in the environmental and social cost of producing a good into every garment that we produce, and then live in a world in which new and used are living in parallel, so those that can afford to buy the clothing new, buy them new, and bring them back into our collective closet in the cloud, so that purchasing and using those garments for those who cannot afford to buy things new can buy them resale. So envision a world in which there's a buy new or buy used button for every garment you find online on every brand, every website. You can buy it new or used. You walk into Lululemon in store, there's a new and a used section, and everything's getting repaired and brought into circulation. If we could bridge the gap between those two, I think that would be a pretty good world.
Well, yay to that. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. That was brilliant. Alternatively, you could also just wear your dad's jacket. So
Hello, hello. Hello, everyone. Hello, hi. I guess I'll give 10 seconds to settle down. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meet, and I'm one of the leads of the Environmental Justice Club. I'll just remove my mask. Yeah, so thank you for being here, and thank you for attending this beautiful Environmental Justice Symposium. This is Melissa, this is Meet. We are Environmental Justice Leads for Bren for 2023 and 24. We are here to talk about more with respect to what is beyond this symposium and what are the steps we have to take beyond this, and that's where the club has been working since the past few years, and we wanted to give a glimpse of how this vision looks like for the coming year and how all of you can be a part of this vision. The reason I'm using the term vision is because we realized historically a lot of committees, a lot of clubs do their work in isolation. Everyone is trying to achieve something every year. New people come in. Everyone's trying to do different things. New cohorts come in. But something which we thought about this year is I don't think that is enough. How do we set up a long-term vision? How do we work for environmental justice at Bren in a more collective way, in a more long-term way, set up milestones for us, and ensure we are achieving it? So maybe next year I graduate, maybe in 5 years down the line, a new cohort comes in 2028, knows what happened earlier and knows what to do further on. But which brings me to first part is what is Environmental Justice Club really trying to envision through our work? And the first thing is how can we institutionalize EJ? Because EJ cannot just be a conversation which we bring in again and again at events, in classrooms, but how do we institutionalize it? I think a lot of people were talking on the panel of decolonizing, but what does it really mean to decolonize? Because to me, to decolonize first, it is to acknowledge that we live in colonial frameworks. A lot of our systems are designed in colonial frameworks, acknowledging that and decolonizing, and which means we have to accept and see what intersections do we have with EJ, with different identities. These are not limited to these, but when we talk about class, gender, disability, race, the fact that the reason I mentioned disability is because it's, as per statistics, it says one out of 4 people in the United States are disabled people. And I say disabled people because in disability community, people say we should not say people with disabilities, but rather disabled people, and it's not a bad thing, so just mind me on that. And also we have to think about various constructs, like with respect to war, how does EJ intersect with war? How does EJ intersect with the mass incarceration system in this country, in other countries? How does it intersect with capitalism? And I think it's important to address a lot of these things when we start talking about decolonizing and trying to fit EJ within our systems at Bren, outside Bren, anywhere we go as individuals. And the second thing which EJ Club wants to do this year is kind of recognize that environmental justice is not a trend. It's not just a cool thing. It's not just a thing we should integrate because it is something which everyone talks about today, but rather it's a lived experience. It's a lived experience which my family has had. Maybe a lot of you have had experiences with environmental justice. Acknowledging that and being a part of it rather than giving sympathy, really trying to understand how can we have compassion towards this topic and work hand in hand, which means we decolonize. And the question must be, how are we going to do this as a part of EJ Club moving forward from the symposium? And that's where I think Melissa will add from her side of what EJ Club is trying to do this year and further beyond.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. So as me mentioned, one of our main goals is to institutionalize EJ at Bren. And our vision is to focus on these 3 key core areas, so awareness, advocacy, and action. So our idea is to create spaces where we can bring awareness to the Bren community to discuss how and what even is decolonization and how we can institutionalize EJ. And then in terms of advocacy, we truly believe in a bottom-up approach where we can work directly in getting perspectives from students as well as faculty, admin, and external local, indigenous, and other grassroots organizations to truly encapsulate institutionalizing EJ at Bren. And in terms of action, we really want to create a space where students can learn more about pursuing careers in EJ by connecting with alumni, for example, or any partnerships that we have with EJ groups. And we also want to just center EJ more as a focus in Bren as a whole. And how we plan on doing this is to create, we've discussed this with admin already, and they are fully on board. So we want to create and develop a 5-year roadmap. And essentially, this roadmap will be to make sure that in the long term, like as we mentioned, we will be both graduating, so we want to make sure that in the long term, this is a sustained effort and that there is accountability and transparency. So working directly with admin to make sure that these steps are being taken and seeing that there is progress in how EJ will be institutionalized. And this is going to take a lot of collaboration. And we hope to see you at the reception. And we hope to, if anyone's interested in collaborations or further discussions, we welcome that in the reception. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. And we're going to take about a 15-minute intermission right now. So please go outside, get refreshments, and we'll get started at 3:20.
Welcome back, everyone. Is it on? Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. They just don't want to stop. I'm glad you're having good conversations, but I'm going to have to resort to my clapping thing. Thank you, Arturo. Welcome back, everyone. It seems to be my job to get the room calmed down. And thanks to Arturo for helping. As you know, I'm Sarah Anderson. You've already met me. I'm here, though, up here in a role as a moderator, which you've seen, and we're going to follow a similar format that we've followed before. So you all know what to expect. I, though, thought I would give a very brief introduction to this session because there's a lot going on policy-wise in this space. So this is highlighting some summer work, obviously, as we've seen before on a Bren Group project. But it's really timely because just yesterday, I think, am I right about the timing? Just yesterday was actually the last day of the public comment period for the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. So super timely. And it was nominated, the sanctuary was actually nominated to NOAA by the Northern Chumash Tribal Council and a coalition of partners. And it was actually the first tribally nominated National Marine Sanctuary. For those of you who don't know about this sanctuary, it's right here, essentially. So we're really lucky. It's currently proposed. Nobody quite knows what the outcome of this rulemaking process will be, but it's currently proposed to run along about 134 miles of coastline from Montaña de Oro State Park in SLO County to Naples, California, right along our Gaviota coast right here in Santa Barbara County. And it would be about 5,600 square miles of marine waters. So that's the background against which this conversation about marine debris and concerns around marine debris in that area is happening. And I wanted to make sure you knew that since it's literally happening in front of our eyes right now. With that, I will briefly introduce our panel members, and then we'll have the students talk about what they did this summer on marine debris in that proposed Chumash National Marine Sanctuary area. So let me start. I guess I'll start with just briefly saying the students' names, and then they can move on. So we have on the end Elizabeth Braun. She's one of our Masters of Environmental Science and Management students, and she worked with Anna Brunick, who's next to her, who's an environmental studies undergraduate this summer, and you'll hear about their work. We are very fortunate to be joined by Laura Inglesrud, who's from the NOAA National Marine Sanctuaries Program and a Bren alumna as well, as many of our panelists are. And so we're really glad to have her back. She's right now probably sifting through a lot of those comments that I mentioned closed yesterday. So she's probably really very glad that she got to walk over here for this panel for a little while. And then we have Violet Sage Walker, who is the chair of the Northern Chumash Tribal Council. And I picked a few things out of her bio that I really like. She's a beekeeper. She has a political science degree, and I'm a political scientist by training, but she actually puts her political science degree into practice, doing politics and organizing and really influencing the policy process, as you can see by the fact that this marine sanctuary was proposed by the Northern Chumash Tribal Council. And so we're very glad to have her joining us today. And I know you had to come from another event, so we're doubly glad that you made it and found us.
I went to come yesterday.
Okay, right.
Lucky the comment closed yesterday.
So I guess our timing, it really is perfect. And then right here I have Teresa Romero, who is the board president of the Native Coast Action Network. She herself has worked a lot in the marine protected area space over the years, including on the statewide MPA leadership team as a tribal rep, but also just generally worked in the space of tribal governance, tribal environmental issues, tribal issues up and down the coast of California. She and I have worked on some prescribed burn work together. So we have a really wonderful panel, and I'm going to stop there so that we have lots of time to have the students introduce themselves and then ask a couple of questions. You ready?
Great, thank you so much, Sarah, and just thank you to everybody for being here today. This is just such a cool event, and I'm just really happy to see all of your faces. My name is Elizabeth Braun. I'm a second-year MESM student here at Bren. I'm studying pollution prevention and remediation, and I was the mentor for Anna for the summer work for our group project, which is on assessing and managing marine debris in the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. Some of the work that I did over the summer with Anna was doing a lot of research on different data collection methodologies for marine debris. Just to clarify for anybody who doesn't know, marine debris is ocean trash. I didn't know that when I started this project, and I'm very into trash. So anyways, so doing a lot of methodology research, and then outreach to different private lands up and down the sanctuary boundaries, such as Vandenberg Space Force Base, Danger Mound Preserve, and Hollister Ranch, and helping on out with some policy work, and yeah, and then doing a lot of data collection and getting out in the field and collecting a lot of trash. So it was very cool.
Which I tease her and say, in the field for her is going to the beach, just so we're all clear.
Yeah, it was, I was telling Sarah the other day on a call, my dog had a great summer with me. He loves data collection so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Brunnick, and Elizabeth said I was the undergraduate intern for the Bren Waste-Free Waves project. The work that I did this summer can be kind of boiled down to 3 different parts. The first being a lot of research and literature review on existing methodologies for beach cleanups. So with there being so many different methodologies, we kind of had to weigh the pros and cons of each and ultimately decide on one to use with how we collected our own data. The second piece was a lot of research concerning policies that concern marine debris in both SLO and Santa Barbara counties, just because that's where the proposed boundary is with the National Marine Sanctuary. And that included putting together a policy write-up that will hopefully be used as kind of a hub of information as the project continues in creating suggestions for lawmakers and people alike. And then the third part, which again, yes, was in the coolest fields that a scientist could be at, the beach, we did data collection. My question? Okay, so my question, based on your perspectives and experiences, what are the biggest concerns currently in this area regarding environmental justice and specifically marine debris?
Does one of you want to start?
They have the microphones.
Good job.
I guess I'll start because I've done a lot of work in the environmental justice arena. When we think of environmental justice, tribes have a little bit different perspective, because when you're looking at environmental resources, you're looking at our resources. And so it's really important to be inclusive of our voices in processes around research and even collecting of trash, probably, and understanding what is in that trash and how it's impacting our resources. I think I'll start there because I think that sometimes gets missed when folks are doing their research.
So that's a good question, but as tribal people, we are going to change the question and ask something instead of environmental justice regarding the marine debris. I like that you clarified what marine debris is, because a lot of people wouldn't consider marine debris to be pollution, so to speak, but it is pollution too. And so I just want to make sure that when we talk about marine debris, we're also talking about an area of not just microplastics, but micro pollution that potentially affects indigenous people, minority groups, and marginalized groups in ways of like reproductive health, in ways of healthcare, in ways of like asthma and other things too. So I just wanted to like widen the net, not just sort of the stuff that you can see in the trash that you can pick up, like cigarette butts and plastic bags, but it is also the things that affect our health, toxins, DDT, things like that too. So in my mind, when I think of marine debris, I also think of the 70,000 or so shipping containers and shipping ships that are on the ocean that are dumping their raw sewage waste and trash into our ocean, which will no longer happen now that the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary is going to be designated off our coast. So you're not going to see cruise liners dumping their raw sewage, which even though it is human waste and potentially not, trash, it is a type of pollution. And I think that it is important that we talk about all these bacterias and things that cause us to have the loss of our traditional foods, whether they're harvesting our Dungeness crabs or our fish, or not able to eat our oysters or even harvest our kelp because of micro pollution that is also, I would consider, micro trash. So.
Thanks, both of you. Those were great answers to that. And actually, just going off of what you ended with, Violet, what I was thinking about is microplastics and the bioaccumulation of those chemicals and pollutants in the environment. And then, that gets concentrated in the fish. And, there's communities in the area of the sanctuary that rely on seafood as part of their diet, and so that can also affect people in that sense of human health and diet. And one of the things with this project that I'm interested in seeing, and part of what you've been doing over the summer is, collecting data and seeing where, what does the marine debris concentration look like out there, because we don't have a lot of data in this area because, like you mentioned, there's a lot of privately owned land areas. And so I'm curious to see, like, where are those concentrations of marine debris, and are those concentrated in vulnerable communities especially?
Thank you all so much for those wonderful answers. I have so many things that I want to say, and I'm so sad that we only have 30 minutes, and I can't just take up your entire day with my questions. But I had my own question for the three of you, which was kind of going off of Anna's question, what are some marine debris conservation benefits of collaborative management that you see coming up with the proposed Chumash Heritage Marine Sanctuary?
So I think that we should just talk about the elephant in the room, that the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary final comment period ended yesterday. How many people made a comment? Well, the rest of you are going to have like community service or something in the new sanctuary. Picking up trash. And being that this is the first tribally nominated and led huge ocean protection, ocean conservation effort that we've ever seen, I'd like to just say that we are not supporting the reduced boundary. We want the 156 miles of coastline and the over 7,000 square miles of ocean. So until the day is, till the last day, we're going to push for the full boundary from Monterey Bay all the way down to the Channel Islands, one continuous marine sanctuary with no gaps. And so, thank you. And so in that area, I just wanted to point out that there is an area that you didn't test, which is the Oceana Dunes, which is a highly impacted community with offshore pollution related to probably off-road vehicles and the dust mitigation, and in a very, very vulnerable, marginalized community with one of the highest rates of pollution in the state of California. So, I'd just like to say that, next time we need to check Oceana Dunes because we are testing in Dangermond and Hollister Ranch. They're very protected. They're very, isolated, and there's not very many people that go there and use those places and those beaches. So I'd like to see what, Pismo Beach after the 4th of July looks like versus what Dangermond looks like. And that's the real measure of like our impact on trash and microplastics is we need to go to these areas that have really high use, especially during the holidays, and especially in highly concentrated towns like Morro Bay, Pismo Beach, Avila, and Oceano. And so those will all be hopefully within the sanctuary. And there's times when I've gone to Oceano, after 4th of July, and just to see, it looks like, for better words, a war zone out there with people just leaving all their trash. And the little, clams and the little snowy plovers and all these things, they're just filled and covered with trash. And so, I'm really passionate about marine debris. It's an important thing that we need to talk about. But I just want to say that the areas that you had mentioned are very, very isolated and protected. And so if you want some marine debris, all of you do your community service in Oceano Dunes, because that's the area that's most highly impacted with trash. And that's when, the jellyfish and all the animals are eating people's balloons, and they're eating people's confetti, and they're eating, all this trash. People are dumping their raw sewage right on the sand there, and it's going right into the ocean. So, I don't want to take up too much time, but, and I forgot what the question was.
Two things, don't worry, we have a lot more data than just the places that I mentioned. Those are just the ones we went to because they're hard to get to, but we have a lot more data than just that. But the question was, what are some benefits that you're seeing in the future from collaborative management in relation to marine debris?
And just so you all know, the Chumash Sanctuary is the one that coined the term collaborative management. So, I think that Caitlin can attest to it. It's been our key phrase, and so by saying collaborative management, we mean everybody. We mean we are the first marine sanctuary to reach out to 4 people in 4 different languages. And so there is no word translated that says leave no trace in Spanish when you go to national parks and you go to state parks and you go to the beaches. And so I want to think about things like that when you say leave no trace. We all know what that means, right? We could have a bumper sticker that says it. We can buy a hat at REI that says leave no trace. Well, the biggest users of our ocean spaces and our outdoor spaces are the Latinx community, and it's not translated into Spanish. So that is one commitment that we've made to make sure that everything that we do in ocean conservation is translated into multiple different languages for different audiences. The idea that, when leave no trace is so common to us, but it's not translated to the rest of the ocean users.
Okay, so I think I really liked what Violet said, but I'm going to build on it because I think when we talk about collaborative approaches, there's the inclusivity of the vulnerable communities. There are folks in our Chumash communities that are in those vulnerable communities as well. And I think it's, the language barrier is certainly a really, really big issue. But I also think that solutions come from within our communities. And so if we build relationships throughout the entire community, solutions can occur in a collaborative way. And I think that's really, really important here because when we talk about marine debris and the impacts to our health and our resources, it's not just impacting one community, it's impacting all of our communities. And I think that's really important to say here. So we're kind of in this together, and we need to come up with the solutions together.
Thanks. Both of those were really great. And from what you both said, especially about, involving the communities and your example about, making sure we look at Oceano Dunes, for example, that to me is a huge reason for why I think it's so important to have this collaborative management structure. And you know, as we start this new sanctuary, to really focus on like what does that mean, and you know, how do we involve the communities that we need to get that local knowledge of the area, and to involve all of the different perspectives, because I really think that's the best way to make a difference in something like marine debris conservation. When you get the community involved and kids involved, and they're excited about cleaning up the beach and kind of building a program from, you know, collaboratively from the beginning, I think will be the best way to, you know, have a sustainable marine debris conservation program for the sanctuary.
All right, thank you. Those were all really helpful. We heard this morning a very similar question asked to the one I'm about to ask, or I guess it was also this afternoon, which is related to what equitable inclusion of Indigenous voices looks like in these management schemes. And that was on a different topic, but I'm really interested to hear, you know, how we think about it in an ocean space, how we think about it in a coastal space, how we think about it when it's spanning counties and along the coast. And so I'd love to hear your sort of perspective about that, but also what does that look like for the important questions that are still out there? You know, the things we don't know about this area. Marine debris they're tackling a little, but what are the other things, and how do we include those voices in all of these questions and answers?
I know you have something to say.
So that's a good question. It's a big question for just talking about, yeah. So specifically just related to marine debris, one example would be to analyze and to interpret things that are critical to Indigenous populations. And so if you were to ask the people, you know, up in Northern California, they would say, let's talk about what is affecting the health of the salmon. Here we're talking about, you know, what's affecting the health of kelp forests, or food that we want to harvest and collect and that has sustained us. And for an example, the endangered abalone. That is part of our, I like to think of something that is not just a food source, but also part of our spirituality and our money system. And so it spans, you know, 3 different areas of our culture. And so we did eat abalone, but we also traded abalone. It was also money, and it was also part of our spiritual beliefs, using abalone and things for ceremony and jewelry. And so asking the question, what type of research would be beneficial to the Indigenous populations, how we can serve the Indigenous people with our research is the first way, you know, in my mind, I think, what are we doing? Why are we prioritizing this? And if we have a limited amount of money and funds, let's do something that's useful and practical.
Okay, so this goes back to my first answer, which was, I think you need to be inclusive of Indigenous community from the beginning. You should always start at that point, because if you think of it later, there have already been a negative impact to that community because their voices weren't included from the get-go. And I think that's really, really imperative and important on projects, whether it's marine debris or any other kind of research. You should at least ask for those inputs and voices on what you're doing first, before you even begin. Because a lot of students are looking for funding through different avenues. When you're thinking about putting a scope together, that's when you need to start outreaching to the Indigenous people in your area, wherever your research takes you in your career. I think that's really, really vital and important, and we have to have those inclusive approaches in your work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, yeah. Those were both really helpful and important answers, and like already, you know, inspiring me as someone involved in the designation of this new sanctuary, like how important it is to, like you both said, hear from the indigenous people and involve them from the very beginning. And I think it's also important to, with the stage that we're at right now in the sanctuary, as Sarah mentioned, it's not completely final yet. And a lot of what we're doing after we cut off the public comment period is now taking all that input and hopefully making, the documents better, but also recognizing that once the sanctuary is designated, like, I think it's going to be a continuous learning process of like what we got wrong, what we can do better, and getting that feedback from, the people that are here and indigenous voices especially.
Violet. We're supposed to wrap up, so I'm just going to say I think we're at like 50,000 comments on the Federal Register for the sanctuary for the full boundaries.
Good job.
So, and I'm hoping that that space leaves room for all of you and your research. So we are acting like a marine sanctuary already before we're nominated. We are a Sea Grant recipient. We are a Whale's Tail Grant recipient. We have been doing the research with Pew and Linfest and eDNA, so please look at what we're doing, and you give like 2 weeks before you send an email, but we are going to need all of you to like reach out to us to get involved in all the work that's going to be needing to be done to do baseline testing and monitoring before we have things like the largest offshore wind farm in the whole world coming into the coast of California. So please all like feel free to volunteer and reach out and use us in the future. We hope that there's a space for all of you in the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary.
I think we'll leave it at that. That was a perfect wrap up. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. All right. We're going to get started again. Thank you for sticking around until the very last one, our very great panel we have today. So we're talking about connecting people to progress and enhancing communities and livelihoods. So very important topic for us to be discussing in this last panel. My name is Arturo Keller, and I'm a professor here at the University of California, at the Bren School. I'm here. Anyway, I'd like to introduce first our panelists. So Erin Clem is a MESM student who specializes in sustainability and the environment, and business and sustainability, sorry. And then we have Daniela Robles. She is an undergraduate from our environmental studies program and also a Promise Scholar. And then we have Michael Burns, who I'm going to get a little bit more explanation, has spent a lot of time first in the federal government, many different agencies, particularly relevant to what we're talking here, the EPA, but then decided he was going to go through and move on and create his own organization, C2P2, which is an organization that basically does connecting communities so that we can solve many different problems, in particular environmental problems, but it can be other issues that they address. And so he's been doing that now and very successful, very busy. We were talking about how many projects he has. Right now, 66 projects, which is crazy given that he has 2 people helping him out plus 1 third person. So the third one is a volunteer. So really great work that Michael is doing. So the work that the students were doing was basically looking at the South River Watershed Alliance, who is working in Georgia, the state of Georgia, right, on addressing water pollution, which is an area that I work on, through a legal mechanism and the process by which they get the third triennial review. So they're going to be telling us a little bit what they did. So I'll let Erin start with her presentation of what was done this summer.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here today. So just to kind of recap what we did over the summer, Michael matched us up with the South River Watershed Alliance. We're one of Michael's 66 projects that he's working on. So over the summer, we created a case study about the South River Watershed Alliance's use of the triennial review process to kind of improve their water quality in the South River in Atlanta. So kind of to break that down a little bit, the South River Watershed Alliance is the only Black-led, Black-focused river organization in the state of Georgia. So we got to work with Dr. Jackie Eccles, who was amazing to work with, so much knowledge and experience in that field. And then the South River starts in Atlanta, and it flows for about 60 miles into Jackson Lake. And it has a extensive, super long history of environmental issues, health issues that are disproportionately affecting Black and low-income communities. And then, so they use the triennial review process, which is part of the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act requires that each state reviews their water quality standards with public hearings once every 3 years. So it's kind of the public's best opportunity to give input into the state's water quality standards and modify them as needed. So as a result of the last triennial review from 2019 to 2022, the South River Watershed Alliance was able to get 13 miles of their river designated to a higher standard, which means more monitoring, higher water quality standards, so to kind of help start the process of cleaning up their river. And then in the current iteration of the triennial review, they're trying to get the remaining 27 miles upgraded to a recreational water designation instead of fishing. And I'm gonna pass it over to Daniela about kind of the ins and outs, what we did every day for the summer.
Hope you can hear me. Hi, my name is Daniela, and I was one of the undergraduate students that worked on this project. And of course, our project mainly focused on literature review, so understanding Georgia's water quality standards, but not only that, also understanding the history in Georgia and why certain groups are where they are, specifically the Black communities, why they're centered in environmental hazard zones. With the literature review, we also did a data analysis. We gathered data from USGS and South River Watershed Alliance, their testing sites, seeing E. coli counts throughout the river. And on another note, we also did mapping. Being able to visualize the actual issue occurring was the most important part. And lastly, we also did a site visit. So we got to go to Georgia. Very beautiful, very green. And we went ahead and actually joined Jacqueline Eccles on the river, and were able to actually connect with the community organization, talk to them, why is this river important to you, and getting to hear their stories. And on top of that, we also got to see other sites in Georgia in which the water quality was really bad. There was a site that was located really close to a housing development in which the water was literally blue, gutter date blue, due to, long range of history of pollution. So, yeah. Oh yeah, of course. So my question for Michael is, can you explain the importance of connecting underrepresented communities in the fight for environmental justice?
Well, that's a loaded question. Let me tell you what they didn't tell you. So when we visited Dr. Eccles, she actually invited us to her home, and they asked questions until I thought I was going to fall out the chair, but they were, just one more, and it was never ending. So the other part they didn't tell you was Dr. Eccles used the triennial review to improve water quality requirements or standards. That had never been done in the United States before. She shared that with people in the state of Georgia, and the number of miles of river that were considered recreational in use, which is the highest standard, went from 18 to 423. That's a big deal. So very, very impressive, to the point where their work on that case study will be part of a panel at the National Environmental Justice Conference in Washington, D.C. in April. So they were included in the abstract I submitted. Yeah, and they deserve that because they worked really, really, really hard to do this. So I appreciate that. So what was your question again?
Oh, yes. Of course. My question was, can you speak on the importance of connecting underrepresented communities in the fight for environmental justice?
Okay, so C2P2 was created, our mission statement is to provide pro bono technical assistance to poor and underserved communities. We don't have any other dividing line. We don't talk about poor Black, we don't talk about poor Indigenous, we don't talk about poor Latinx, we don't talk about poor white. We just talk about poor. Because at the end of the day, we have so much more in common than we do opposite, but we spend all our time talking about what we don't agree on instead of collaborating on what we do agree on. So we don't do that. So we've done projects for all those different demographics. I don't even care if they're a Democrat or Republican, because there's poor Republicans too. They may not realize that, but we educate them.
Good job.
The bottom line is the definition of environmental justice has matured quite a bit since President Clinton signed the original environmental justice order in the 90s. This administration has expanded that to the point where they're taking a look at the disparate opportunities in all communities. And they talk about the fact that it's all communities, not just one community. It's all poor communities. There is a particular sensitivity to me to indigenous and rural, because they are the most disadvantaged communities. And I don't tell you that based on what somebody told you, I tell you that based on where I've been. So the fight for environmental justice is the fight to give them the opportunity to compete on a level playing field just like everybody else, which is what we do. That's why we do the projects we do. When we go to a community, I have never said, this is what I'm gonna do for you. The first question I ask them is, how can I help you? Because if it's not what they want, then why am I there? Just because people are poor and underserved doesn't mean they don't know what they want. They know where they want to go, they just need help to get there. Our job to help these environmental justice communities is to level the playing field so they can compete just like everybody else. Because to me, that is quintessentially American, to give everybody an equal chance to compete. And they have competed and they have won. I can tell you projects where a little bitty place in Georgia beat out the city of Atlanta for a project. Now, I don't get invited to Atlanta's Christmas party anymore, but that's what environmental justice is about. Environmental justice is about giving those disadvantaged communities the opportunity to compete just like everybody else. It's not about giving them 40% of every dollar, because when the dollars go away, then does environmental justice go away? No, it doesn't. It's about giving them the same opportunity to go after the resources just like everybody else. It's about changing the policies and the procedures so that they're fair and equitable amongst all people, not just some people. So it's a long answer to your question, but you ask.
So my question kind of goes based on, you have a long history in the EPA, and I was just wondering what sparked your transition from the EPA going into creating C2P2?
Well, the Environmental Protection Agency, you have to remember, there is no congressional law or legislation that created the EPA. The EPA was created by an executive order, which means some president, in our case, President Richard Nixon, signed an executive order and created the Environmental Protection Agency. That makes that agency real sensitive when new people come into office, because just like executive orders get signed, they can be canceled. So there is always that concern, are they going to cancel it? And I have told them ad nauseum, that'll never happen, the blowback will be huge. They're like, well. So they're very political sensitive to the political waves. Poor people don't have political waves. Poor people are poor. They're hungry when there's Democrats in power, and they're hungry when there's Republicans in power. So working with EPA, which is where I created the program, and they were the ones that gave me the space and the opportunity to create it. But when the political wind shifted, we talked more about what we wanted communities to do rather than about asking them how we could help them. And philosophically, since I created it, I said, that's not what I created for. So I said, you do you, I'm gonna do me. I left on Friday and filed my paperwork on Monday, and then that was February 2020. A month later, they shut the whole world down for COVID. My wife said, that wasn't your best idea. But it was an opportunity to do the work without political influence or persuasion. It was the ability to do what I said before, just focus on poor and underserved, regardless of all other factors. I wanted to be able to do that. So do I scramble for funds as a nonprofit? Of course I do, okay? Like I said, I've had to actually tell people I can't do more projects because 66 is actually an awful lot of projects. And I've had to actually tell people I can't do more, which hurts me to my core, because there are a lot of people I'd love to help, but I just physically, I mean, the volunteers even working 80 hours a week. So I mean, I'm out of hours. So I want to be able to get more funds to do more people, but at the end of the day, we get to do what's right, period, with no political persuasion, influence, or concerns. And I kind of like that. I kind of like to be able to just realize at the end of the day, the only race I worry about is human. That's the part I like. So that gives us the opportunity to do that. So am I working harder than I ever have my entire life? Absolutely. But would I do this until I draw my last breath? Absolutely. Because we all have an obligation to give to those that don't have. So that's why I do it, and that's why I left.
So, Michael, you have 66 projects. You told me in the break, you have a backlog. People just say, we want more. What's your criteria? How do you go about the next one that you're going to have to? This whole process keeps moving. So you're going to have next year. You're going to have more projects. Some finish up, some start up. What are your criteria for deciding this community needs help? We understand already they have to be poor. But what other criteria? How ready do they have to be for the project? What kind of information? What are some of the other aspects that you take into account for making that decision?
Well, to talk about that, we need to talk about the process on how C2P2 works. So a community has an issue that they need help with, and they contact us, and we get them from everywhere: federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, NGOs, Some communities see our website and they call us, you know, unsolicited. We get that issue and we take a look at our list of partners. We have worked with 80 colleges and universities across the country, and we have other partners that we work with. The Environmental Defense Fund is a partner. The National Wildlife Foundation is a partner. The American Geophysics Union is a partner. Engineers Without Borders is a partner. From our work in Alaska, the Cold Climate Housing Research Center is a partner. Department of Energy is a partner. Department of Interior is a partner. We take a look at that issue, and we take a look at our list of partners and say, who is best situated to be able to provide that assistance? In some cases, it may be 20 people. In some cases, it may be 2, depending on the issue. We give it to our partners and say, can you assist with these issues? In some cases, they can. In some cases, they'll say, well, I can't do it now, but I can start in January or in the summer. In some cases, they'll say, we can start on it next year. And there are very rare occasions where somebody will give us an issue like, can you go and knock on doors and hand out pamphlets? No, we can't do that. So we have to say no. But most of the time, that's how we do it. So when you talk about selection, it's more about how our partners do the work. We give the schools the opportunity to pick what they want to do because the schools do this pro bono. Well, and please understand, pro bono doesn't mean no compensation, because the students get, as a senior design or a capstone or a practicum project, or in some cases, doctorate thesis, they get a chance to work on that academic degree on something that is really cool, that they know it makes a difference in the lives of people that they're working with, and that when it's done and when they're interviewing for a job, they not only get to talk about what they learned, but they get to talk about what they did. And that makes a difference when you're getting hired. So it's depending on what our partners can do and when they're available to do it. So it's not always based on what they ask for.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on how and when we can give them the help based on what our partners can provide.
Okay. Great. And you know, I think that's another trademark of your organization, working with all these universities and colleges to find out, and other organizations, but to find out how do you engage young people in a lot of these issues. I think that's fantastic. So are there issues that you focus on and others that you say, that's probably not for us? Is there, how do you draw the line there?
Well, I mean, right now, climate change and sustainability are very, very, very big topics. There's a lot of money to support those kind of projects. But I really like staying true to our philosophical approach, which is a very simple question of how can I help you? Mm-hmm. So there's no barriers on how can I help you. The only issue is, can I get you the help that you need? Mm-hmm. If there's something in sustainability or the climate change area, great. We're doing projects like that in Alaska. We're doing one in the Bahamas, one in Mississippi, one in Georgia. We just finished one in New York and finished one in Missouri. But at the end of the day, I like to stay true to what they ask for, because that's the thing that's most important. And the other thing I do have to say is, we don't do a one and done. I cannot tell you the communities that I've been in where the people have come, they've got the data, they asked questions, they did the report, it looked great, never saw them again. They can call us next year or 5 years from now and ask you. I've got communities I've worked with for 6 years. I started Alaska one project, now we're doing 5. So it's important. The only way you can give people hope is for them to believe what you're saying is true and to know that you're going to be there no matter what. And we try to fulfill that. So a long answer to your question.
That's fine. Long answer, great. Success in outcomes. How do you sort of evaluate whether you made it? You really gave the community what they were expecting. How is that evaluated? How do you consider that in your process?
So one of the things that we established right from the very beginning of the program was that the students had to give not only the product that was asked for, be it a plan, a program, a design, a study, a cost-benefit analysis, health impact assessment, whatever it was asked for, But they have to go back and they have to give a formal presentation back to the community for 2 reasons. Number one, I want the community to be able to hear what was done, even though we have bi-weekly meetings to make sure everything stays on track, but I want them to hear what was done. And I also want them to hear if there's any follow-ups that come as a result of that work. So the students have to do that. One of the things that I've tried to focus on as a nonprofit is to understand we should always be working on being able to get better tomorrow than we were today. So we're now working with somebody that's creating an AI program that you plug in an issue and it'll tell you on the other side the source of funding for that issue, whether it's federal, state, philanthropic, or whatever, which is huge, okay? Yeah. No, and he's working on that. Went to school at Stanford, and he's working on finishing that. So once that's done, that'll be another step we can do, because now we can tell people where they can get the money from for the project. So when the next step is for me to get the resources to be able to hire 2 or 3 grant writers, so then once they understand where the money's coming from, then we can help them write the grants. Then we've closed the circle. You know, now they may get funded or they may not. But the one thing that I have learned is when people see the opportunity for progress, that gives them hope. And when people have hope, they will continue to move forward regardless. Right. So, but I'm always looking on how much more I can do, and that's where we're at, and that's what we're trying to do.
Great, great. So you've empowered them. Great. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let me turn over to Erin and ask her. So for you, Erin, you're more focused on business and sustainability and those aspects. So this was kind of a move in a different direction because you were working on a project where it's more water quality and all those aspects. What was the most surprising thing for you in this project? What unexpected, and also some experiences that you may have had that were fun experiences doing the project?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it was a really good learning experience, and one of the big benefits of coming to Bren is it's so interdisciplinary, because like the capstone that I'm working on is much more corporate driven, carbon accounting. My classes are more similar in that space. But initially coming into this project, I was really excited, and I was coming into it from kind of a consulting mindset. Where I was going to go help out a client on this problem and then get some project management skills working with Daniela. But I actually really liked getting to go out into the community and talk to people, because so much of the corporate sphere is just talking to the corporate board or like the one person you're trying to serve. But so especially going out on the trip and going to go meet Jackie in person, go to her house, eat dinners with her, meet other people within the organization, and just being able to see the community and what is being affected and what we're trying to help change. I thought that was a really good experience.
Great, excellent, great. And Daniela, for you, this was also a different experience. How did it change the way you think about environmental issues and what you may do forward with your career as you move out?
That's a really good question. Thank you. This definitely changed my mindset around environmental justice issues, specifically realizing the big community aspect about solving environmental issues, seeing that it's just not just one person or the government doing it, it's the actual people, it's the public that's going out there. They know what they want, they know the issues in their communities, and they kind of know how to go from there. So being able to talk to South River Water Organization, Jackie, but not only Jackie, also other people that were part of it, and seeing their kind of outlook and how important the river is to them. And not only, not only is it good recreationally, but also mentally, physically, getting you out there, specifically communities that have been historically pushed out of green spaces. And I feel like Jackie's, doing a big part on trying to bring back those communities into where they belong, where they started. So, yeah. And where I decided to go, well, I definitely know that I want to focus on social justice issues, specifically environmental issues, and being able to give back to a community, specifically in the environmental aspect, seeing how important it is to them.
Great, great answer.
And
yes.
One thing, if I could add, that's something that we make sure that every student that works on a project does for us. They all get a chance at least once to go to the community you're doing the work for. Not to see the site, not to visit where the work is being done, but to be able to make sure that they get a chance to see people as people. That they see them as they're just different. There's nothing wrong with being different. I mean, she's chocolate ice cream, she's vanilla ice cream, but it's all ice cream. So the cookies were good. I'm sorry, I had to talk about dessert. But the bottom line is, it's important for students to understand, but but for the grace of God, that could be me. I could be the one that's hungry. I could be the one that's homeless. I could be the one that doesn't have. But they get to see them as real people, and that's really, really important. So every student, and I have done some things, including cutting my salary so students could make those trips, but to me, that's why it's so important that it's worth me doing that to make sure they get that chance. So.
Great. So I'm going to break protocol and let the audience ask questions. Just a few. We don't have 5 minutes. So we have one question back there. Do I need to repeat it, or is it okay? I'll repeat it so that we can, yeah.
Just a comment. First year Bren School who are interested and are looking for a group project, have any interest in doing one with CTP2, talk to Michael.
Okay.
Well, you just guaranteed I'm not getting to the cookies again. So.
Okay, great. So if you have a group project idea, talk to Michael. All right, other questions? Yes. So the question is whether he hasn't been involved with the aftermath of the train derailment in East Palestine, so the one that dumped a lot of toxic chemicals. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have done a lot of work with FEMA. I was there to provide some assistance after the horrific floods in Texas a few years ago, after there was some horrific floods in North Carolina as a result of Hurricane Michael in the Florida Panhandle. And some of the projects we did in Missouri were actually projects that FEMA couldn't do, that they came back and asked us if we could do them on their behalf. So we have been there, and particularly Hurricane Michael, because we were there not too long after the hurricane hit. So we have provided an awful lot of assistance to those communities afterwards, because the federal government has a bureaucracy sort of like a 1,000-car train. I mean, it's long and it takes a long time to get there. You tell me a problem on Monday, I'm looking for a partner Monday night, and if I can find them, we're talking about how we're going to move forward on Wednesday. I mean, so we move a lot faster, and FEMA knows that, so they'll reach out to us. As a matter of fact, they want to talk to me about someplace else they want me to go. So. But so we have done disaster assistance and disaster relief, and the schools have done a sensational job with that too. They've done really, really good work on that.
Great. Other questions? Chris?
I want to thank you for the tremendous partnership with Bren School. We've known each other for several years now, and I've had the pleasure to serve as faculty advisor and watch you work with students, and it's been outstanding. But I have a hard question for you. You can't duck out of this one.
Too many places to hide, so you're in good shape.
I'll take the bullet for him.
Who benefits more from these projects, the communities or the students?
The benefit is equal, but my priority is communities. Okay? So I'd like to think that the students get as much out of I would tell you, I think Daniela and Aaron got as much out of doing the project as what Jackie got out of the project. So I think the benefit is equal, but my priority will always be the communities, always, 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 because they're the ones that need the help. See, that was all right. That was all right.
I like that. Any more questions?
Appreciate that.
Any more questions? Well, I just want to thank Michael and Aaron and Daniela for a great panel, but in particular Michael for being out here. He travels it's incredible. I mean, I just hear what he does. Or it goes and visits all these places. So it was wonderful that you were able to make the time to come and be with us. But thank you very much for that.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we have the reception now.
The reception soon, but before we go to reception, I'm going to introduce Michael Mantell to give some closing remarks. But before I even introduce Michael Mantell, I want to tell you, first of all, I was inspired by so many of these conversations, but particularly inspired by this comment about hiring more faculty of color, and wanted to let you know that we are part of a cluster hire in environmental justice from across campus, where we've already run our search, but there's a search going on in environmental studies, a search going on in PSTAT, probability and statistics, and a search going on in environmental studies for faculty who will form a real core on this campus in environmental justice, as well as a cluster hire in American Indian and Indigenous Studies of 3 new faculty. So there's a lot of really exciting work going on. I'm loving this and thinking about how it's just going to keep getting better as we have more and more folks on campus and partners working on this. I also want to take just a moment to give a shout out to the people who are making this actually happen, which is Olivia, who you have seen. She did such hard work on this, getting all the panels together ahead of time, putting together the themes, finding people to talk, and then making sure microphones got handed to the right people all the way down the line, and we could not have done it without her. And then her partner in helping us do this whole program is Corey Lopazansky. I never quite get it right. I don't know if she's in the room right now, but she's another person who's been such a help to us in putting together all of this for the Mantell Fellows, the Bell Fellows. And then, of course, Patty, who many of you know, who's super instrumental. She keeps these amazing spreadsheets of who's partnering with whom and who the undergrad is and who the graduate students are and how we're going to fund this, and then figures out ways to do this every year. And we could not possibly do this without her just jumping in and doing it. And I know you're supported by Renee and by Beth and by Lotus, the team of development here, but Patty really makes every single thing that we try to do in this program happen. And we really, really appreciate it, Patty. But with that, that's all the hard work behind the scenes. I want to introduce to all of you Michael Mantell, who you've obviously been hearing about constantly because these are the Mantell Fellows. Michael is the founder and the former president of what's called the Resources Legacy Fund, which basically has helped to, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like conserve, I have all these things, conserve over 5 million acres in California, generate $30 billion in new public funding for water, land, and ocean conservation. In some ways, like Michael Burns is a kind of matchmaker on these projects, Michael Mantell has been a matchmaker across California for public-private partnerships to conserve California. He's been just incredibly instrumental. And then he decided to step down from that position. And his friends and colleagues basically realized that he'd done so much for the environment that he might as well keep doing for the environment in retirement, and put together this gift, joined by colleagues, family, friends, to make the Mantell Fellows program happen in Michael Mantell's name. And we feel so fortunate that all of his good work was out there to be recognized, because we've really benefited, our students have really benefited from the work that he did, and therefore the gift that he inspired. And so we just are really deeply appreciative of Michael. He did a lot of other things in his life, but I hope this is one of the things that's a lasting legacy out of the conservation work that Michael has done. So with that, I think I will introduce Michael. He's going to give our wrap-up closing remarks, and so please join me in welcoming Michael.
Can you hear me? Obviously, I didn't have any schooling in microphones, but thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much for everyone. What an amazing afternoon, I have to say. There's just so much depth. There is so much experiences and genuine wisdom from so many diverse backgrounds and perspectives. It's really amazing, and it's not because it's about me. It's just I'm sitting here as someone taking it all in, and it's really a tribute to the great work that's going on here. And I realize I'm the only thing right now between you getting outside, enjoying food, and conversations. So I'm going to try to make this really brief with just a few notable highlights and some common threads and a closing comment I want to make. And I do want to just echo Sarah in thanking Patty and Olivia and Corey and Lotus and so many others, because this whole fellowship and the dean, Steve Gaines, my dear friend and colleague who couldn't be here, so much work goes into this. And this has been, this has basically existed for a year and a half, and it's unbelievable what the Bren School has pulled together. And all the fellows and all the panelists and my dear friend and colleague Rue, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. It's I have gotten tremendous joy in working with many others, including a former colleague and dear friend of mine, Caitlin Gaffney, who's here, and Will Shafroff, who was the first chair of our board, among many others, in achieving important wins for the environment, but also it's so much satisfaction and inspiration from working with students and faculty and young people throughout. It just it continually gave me so much enthusiasm and confidence in terms of how we make things happen. And this fellowship program and this symposium of a way to exchange ideas is just further evidence of that. I know all of us feel that we're living, in a world that's constantly seems to be spinning out of control. I mean, mass shootings, terrorism, wars, systematic racism, inequality, misinformation, and we're just all overwhelmed by this digital age and all this information coming in constantly. But it's so important to step back and to have these experiences and have these kind of programs to keep us focused on what's really important and what is so genuine and actually what truly is making a difference, not just for the environment, but for our humanity. And so, a lot of what we got, and I've also just, it's been wonderful to be able to work in the policy arena and the public funding arena, but it's been so important to also be at the project level and working with real people in real communities. It keeps you grounded, it helps influence the policy and the funding directions, and it exposes you to just incredible commitment, talent, strategic thinking that you just don't get at other levels that we operate in. And that, just feel so blessed to have had the opportunity to work with activists, with communities, with indigenous leaders, with people of color, that have really helped me learn and inform me in terms of outcomes and ways to pursue things. that I don't think people put enough premium on, frankly, in our field and as it goes forward. But, you know, aside from the specifics, which are just so important that we've got today from so many of you, is some of these overriding things about, and I think this came through from Rue's talk in every discussion, is relationships are at the core. And the genuineness of relationships. These are not transactional relationships. These are, you get to really understand where people are coming from. You get to know them as people. You not only you get your intellect focused on what needs to happen, but you get your whole emotions tied into this in a way that is so important. And you just heard so much about listening and learning, and Michael Byrne's work about finding out what it is the community needs and then working from that. You may have your own ideas, and they're not. I'm not trying to say they're insignificant, but they're only as good as what the community wants and will embody. And I just want to be very, candid too, in that some of the art of this is finding people in the community who see things, take things to a bigger scale, are willing to take things to a bigger scale, and see that there's a broader way of opportunities to go at something. And that's part of what your job is in working. It goes back and forth. I mean, there is really a genuine interaction and learning from each other that allows you to develop the most robust and pragmatic, but also important solutions together. And so deep is the listening and the learning. And as Rue pointed out, having the long view. You cannot be impatient. I mean, I find I'm an impatient person in my work. I want to see things happen. I really want to see results. But you've got to adjust, adapt, make changes, be willing to take risks, and be patient, because sometimes what you're doing is you're setting the groundwork and setting all this motion in place, but waiting for the stars to align politically to make it happen. But when those stars align, you're ready to jump and do it. And that so much of what we got today is experiences, in that kind of realm. The listening to the tribes and communities, and the comment I think Laura made about if you've heard from one tribe, you've only heard from one tribe, is so true. But it's true of all these communities we work with. We're not monoliths, okay? And we all are, as Michael, we're all human beings, but there's different responses we have. There's different set of experiences we bring to it, and you just cannot generalize. And one size approach does not fit all. The apparel industry conversation was pretty interesting to me, as my colleague Will Shafroth pointed out. I'm on the board of the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and over 15 years ago, the Monterey Bay Aquarium developed Seafood Watch, which is a listing of red, yellow, and green for sustainable fisheries. And about 2018, that's picked up by this governance body, as Will mentioned, the Marine Stewardship Council. And about 2018, they developed a whole set of criteria on fair labor practices in the fishing community, because you have so many countries where, and so many areas of the world where fish is the main source of protein. And yet they treat the people who do this, horribly. I don't know the apparel industry that well, but the stories I've heard from fishing it's just abominable. It's just scary. You're really dealing with slavery in some cases. And this effort by the aquarium has been incredibly successful. And I know there was some really good discussion about things that the apparel industry could do to make the consumer more aware of what they're getting and what choices they have. It just made me think there's a lot the apparel industry can learn, or people who care about the apparel industry can learn from the whole experience in sustainable seafood. My organization, and Caitlin particularly, has been involved from the beginning with Violet and others in the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And it is precedent setting and on many levels, and this whole notion of collaborative management is so important for the future, not only in that sanctuary, but in so many other areas where we work on in land and in oceans. And we're doing, I mean, I had the privilege of being able to work in Canada with some colleagues with First Nations on land protection in the boreal forest. And Canada is far ahead of the US in terms of indigenous ownership, indigenous management, indigenous stewardship. And fortunately, we're making some progress in the United States in terms of Bears Ears National Monument, but we have a long way to go on land in terms of recognizing, and you know, even in academia is getting there, but has a long way to go in recognizing cultural knowledge, cultural history, incorporating that into practices. But we, you know, the government as stewards of land has to get better at giving co-management, at giving stewardship responsibility to tribes in many situations. And the Atlanta experience, Atlanta's on my mind a lot because of the incredible work that the district attorney's done in Fulton County on another whole set of issues. But it's really heartening to hear. It's really heartening to hear what's gone on there with that whole system and those sets of communities. And as was said, it is what the community wants, and it is about. I love the way Michael put it on helping communities compete on a level. Environmental justice is helping communities compete on a level playing field. So, you know, I will say, as you think about your future, your career, you know, what you're doing with your time, I do want to leave you with an insight from a Holocaust victim who survived two concentration camps and went on to become an acclaimed psychiatrist and a writer. His name is Viktor Frankl. And he said in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, something that really stuck with me and that I just want to leave you with. And it actually is something that came up in an indirect way in a number of these conversations today. What he wrote is that success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. It comes from the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a cause greater than oneself. And you've seen people here who have dedicated their lives to causes greater than themselves. And so you all are part of a larger team working on an issue or cause that you believe in, and that it is more than you were just doing to pass time, to collect money, and the like. So stay with it and give it all you've got. Keep growing, keep being challenged, and learning. And from that will come success and happiness and energy to do even more in the years ahead. And as Michael Burns said to that hard question he was asked, we get to do what is right. Just always try to keep that in mind as you move forward. And thank you again so much for all you're doing for the environment and for our humanity. And enjoy out there. I don't need to take this home.
Yeah.
I don't need to take this home.